Welcome. Today we present a curated compendium featuring 5 of our most compelling narrations. These tales have already captivated our audience, and now they come together in one masterful showcase of suspense and horror. Immerse yourself in the depths of dread with our special collection. Cryptic Chronicles presents Xikawuul. Curiosity isn't always a good thing. I once thought discovering everything the world had to offer was my true passion. It turns out, though, some things are best left alone. I always had an interest in the unknown and the unexplained. Mysteries were what I enjoyed most, and the darker the story, the more it fascinated me. Last year, on my 23rd birthday, I launched a website focused on mysterious stories, and I loved it more than anything. People sent in crazy tales, ranging from being followed in the woods to finding strange objects. I read every single story I received and always attempted to come up with an answer to the mystery. I rarely could, though, as such things are hard to explain, and I think humanity as a whole can't comprehend what might be out there. When I wasn't running the website, I would explore woods and haunted houses, looking for anything out of the ordinary. I also asked people to send in objects or documents that they thought was of mysterious origin or haunted. I never really had anything strange happen, and after over 6 months, I began to feel a little bored. The stories people told were great, but I never actually saw anything firsthand that made me truly believe in the supernatural. That all changed when I made the biggest mistake of my entire life. Outside of people sending me things, I would also search for objects myself. A boring but simple place that I would check out every Sunday was my local library. I'd dig through endless amounts of books looking for anything unusual or dark. I never expected to find much, but I guess the goal was something along the lines of a book that had been passed from owner to owner, causing fear before finally ending up there. A cursed item or artifact, so to speak. I figured I'd never find anything, but it was fun to look all the same. Either way, I loved reading, and the library in my town was very calm and peaceful. It was a particularly cool August day when everything began. I woke up pretty early and checked the website, but nothing had changed from the night before. I sat back in my chair and debated what to do with my day. I finally decided I'd head to the library for an hour or so and see if I could find anything. It was only a 10-minute walk from my house, so I got there a little before 8:30. I nodded to the librarian as I walked through the glass doors. She was used to seeing me in there and was always very nice. I browsed through the shelves for about 20 minutes looking for anything new, but I didn't have much luck. I found one book about the Salem witch trials, but it was essentially just stating facts about what happened, and it wasn't anything that I didn't already know. I began to feel discouraged, not just because of the book, but in general. I loved everything unknown. I wanted to believe every word of the stories people sent me, but I had to admit at this point it was becoming difficult. I considered leaving the library and re-evaluating my whole life, but before I did, a book at the end of the aisle caught my eye. It was bigger than most of the other books and seemed to be made out of a strange material. It stuck out a few inches into the aisle, which was the only reason I even noticed it. There was something else too, a strange feeling I got when I looked at it. A part of me thought I should ignore the book and leave, but my curiosity outweighed those feelings. I grabbed the book and pulled it out slowly. It was large and bound in what looked like aged leather. It was clear that it was incredibly old, and there was no writing of any kind on the cover or the back. I pulled it open and coughed as dust filled my lungs. I wheezed into my arm for a few seconds before turning my attention back to the first page. It was entirely blank except for one word that I had never heard before and didn't understand. It simply said, Xikawuul. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I tried to make sense of what I had read. I wasn't sure if it was a statement in a strange language or a name of some kind. My best guess was that it was a name or title. Nothing else seemed logical. I turned to the next page, and to my surprise it looked just like the first one. It just said Xikawuul again, with nothing else at all on the entire page. I felt even weirder the more I flipped, but page after page it was the same thing. Xikawuul in big letters on every single page of the book. There were 33 unmarked pages, and all of them just displayed this strange word. I was confused, but also excited, as I hadn't been so intrigued by something in a long time. I decided I would take the book home and do more research. I checked out the book and asked if the librarian knew where it had come from, but she stated she had never seen it before. I walked home, book in hand, thinking about what this strange word could possibly mean. When I got home, the first thing I did was a Google search on it, but to my surprise, I didn't find anything at all. No translation, no definition, no names that matched it. Absolutely nothing at all, no indication of what Xikawuul meant. I sat back in my chair and thought hard for a few minutes. I felt so at a loss, as I expected Google to come up with at least some kind of explanation. I decided to ask on my website if anyone was familiar with the word, and then I looked through the book one more time to make sure I hadn't missed anything. I hadn't though. It was just Xikawuul on every page in the exact same handwriting. I was so confused and decided to take a break for the rest of the day and try and find something else to do, as I was getting a strange feeling. I watched TV until it got dark, and then at about 10, I decided to head to bed. That night, I had a dream that an old woman chased me around the forest near my house, screaming Xikawuul at me over and over again until I finally woke up. I was covered in sweat, and my heart was racing as I shook my head and sat up. I thought I had probably just spent too much time looking at the book, as it was all that was on my mind. I fell back asleep and slept peacefully for a few more hours, and slowly got up as the light pierced through my bedroom window. I felt a bit calmer, but I still had a bad feeling. I figured I should check the outside of my house just to make sure everything was fine. I knew it probably was, but since I lived alone, I liked to be safe. I walked through my living room and the book caught my eye. I could have sworn I closed it the night before, but it was open. I figured I had to be mistaken, as I walked over and shut it, reading Xikawuul one more time, trying to make it register anything that made sense in my brain. I stepped out the front door and examined my house. I rented the house from my dad's friend, and since he couldn't find anyone else to take any of the other 2 rooms, I lived alone full-time, which was a sweet deal for me. I scanned the exterior of the house, but there was nothing of note. Before I went back inside, I examined the tree line. The forest was about 75 feet from my house and was big, ranging for a few miles. I noticed what looked like a bunch of branches right in front of the trees, and I got the same grim feeling, like when I was looking at the book. I slowly walked over to examine what they were, and when they came into view, my heart dropped. At that point in time, it was probably the worst feeling I ever had in my entire life. I was right about it being branches, but I would never have guessed how they were laid out. They were broken into letters and spelled out a single word. As you probably could have guessed, the word was Xikawuul. I couldn't believe what I had seen. I slowly backed away from the branches, careful not to touch them, and went back inside, slamming the door. I racked my brain trying to come up with any explanation that made sense, but nothing did. I opened the book again and flipped through the endless pages of Xikawuul, looking for anything at all that would help explain this, but as I suspected, there was nothing. I sat back on my couch feeling very uncomfortable. Xikawuul was all that I could think about. I didn't even want to check if it was actually blood. I decided to return the book immediately. I grabbed it and began walking towards the library, hoping to get some answers, but mainly just with the goal of getting rid of the book. It was like my mind was overcome by Xikawuul, and it just ran through my thoughts over and over again. I got to the library quickly and walked up to the front desk immediately. The librarian seemed taken aback, as I'm sure I had a somewhat crazed look on my face. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "I checked out this book. I want to return it, but I have to ask first. Do you know what this word means?" I flipped it open to the first page, and she put on her glasses to read it. "Xikawuul," she said in a confused tone. "No, I have no idea what that could mean." I wasn't surprised by that response. I really didn't expect much. "All right, I was just curious. Thanks anyway. Like I said, I want to return it either way." She nodded, looking a bit concerned, and set it aside on the counter. I turned around and headed out the front door. Xikawuul, I heard behind me in a whispered tone. I wasn't sure if I imagined it or not. "What was that?" I asked the librarian with terror overcoming me. "Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about what it could mean. It sounds strangely familiar, but I don't know why." "Ha ha ha, gotcha," I shakily replied, pushing my way out the front door. I could feel her eyes on me as I stepped out onto the street. I calmed down some as I headed home, but I was still weary. The librarian seemed odd, but so did everything over the past 48 hours. I tried to rid all of this from my mind as I walked home. I stepped through the front door and collapsed to the ground when I saw it. The book was somehow back, sitting in my living room, wide open. And this time, no human being said it, but I still heard it clear as day coming from the book. "Xikawuul," it hissed in a sinister voice. I couldn't take my eyes off that horrible book as it continued to whisper it over and over. I packed my bag quickly and left my house without a second thought. I had a good friend who lived about 5 minutes from me, and I knew he would let me stay with him without any heads up. I called on the way just to be safe, but he was completely fine with it. I didn't mention why, as I felt like it would be impossible for someone to believe my story. When I got to his house, he was heading out to work, but he told me it was fine for me to hang out as his roommate was out of town, and the whole basement was empty. I laid down on the couch at the bottom of the stairs and stared up at the ceiling. I tried to make sense of what was happening, but I still couldn't. Xikawuul ran through my thoughts, and I couldn't rid myself of it no matter what I did. I tried to think about other things, anything else, but no matter what it was always there. I watched a couple movies and relaxed a bit, but not very much. I reached the conclusion that the book was cursed or something, and Xikawuul had some kind of evil supernatural meaning. Nothing had really happened to indicate that the word was evil, but I just had such a bad feeling about it. The branches and the writing on the house felt threatening one way or another, but even besides that, when I saw Xikawuul or thought about it, I just felt afraid and uncomfortable, like I had seen something that I wasn't supposed to. My friend worked all day and didn't get back until 10. I didn't want to come across as weird, but I couldn't resist asking him if the word meant anything to him. Like the librarian, I didn't think it would, but I still had to ask. "Hey man, does the word Xikawuul mean anything to you?" What? Xikawuul?" He looked incredibly confused, so I decided to move on. "Someone at the library just said it today. I was confused too." He laughed briefly, and I let out a forced chuckle, and then quickly changed the subject. We hung out for about a half hour, but since he had to work again the next morning, he went upstairs to bed, and I tried to get some shut-eye as well. I felt a bit safer at his place, but I dreaded what might be going on at my house with the book. I figured I'd go check it out in the morning, and if there was anything new, I'd call my dad and see if he could help make any sense out of it. I didn't think he'd fully believe me, but he knew I wouldn't lie about such a thing. I eventually drifted off to sleep, and the same exact dream awoke me again very early. I yawned and looked around the room, but everything seemed the same. I glanced towards the stairs and about had a heart attack when I saw it. The book was sitting on the steps about halfway up. It was open again and almost seemed to whisper that horrible word. I was frozen with fear, and my mind just kept repeating Xikawuul over and over again. I slowly got up and grabbed the book, looking for anything different, but it was the same thing all over. I was completely done with it, and I grabbed the book and headed back to my house without waking up my friend. I walked up the driveway and saw the house was covered with more writing. There were 3 more words in the same red lettering, and there were another 3 made out of branches in the lawn. I didn't care though. There was only one thing on my mind. I was going to burn the book. I had a feeling it would end everything, and it was the only real idea I had. No matter what, I was going to rid myself of Xikawuul once and for all. I had a small fire pit outside, and I threw the book into it with some kindling and lit the side of the book. As I did, it flung itself open and rifled through the pages as it slowly became engulfed in flames. As it did, a hissing sound repeating Xikawuul over and over again came from the middle of the blaze. I realized quickly that the pages themselves weren't burning. It was almost as if the space outside of the book was on fire, but the book itself was untouched by the flames. I began to panic as the fire slowly died, and I wasn't able to start another one. I decided to just leave the book and go inside as it continued to hiss Xikawuul quietly over and over. I went inside and locked the door. I debated what to do, and I decided I was going to head to my parents' house and tell them everything that had happened. I went up to my room and packed a bag. On my way down the stairs, I almost fell down as I glanced into the living room. The book was inside the house, open once again. I ran over to that horrible text and slammed it shut as I could continue to hear it hiss Xikawuul. I threw it in the trash and prepared to head out. Before I could, though, I heard a door creak open upstairs. To my absolute horror, I heard the same hissing sound coming from upstairs, getting louder and louder. It was clear someone was walking around, and I froze, terrified, my eyes glued on the stairs. I heard someone step onto the first step, and then an old woman's voice repeating Xikawuul over and over again. I tried to open the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I turned around slowly and saw the old woman from my dreams standing on the last step, staring at me, still whispering Xikawuul. She looked like the librarian, but if she were 20 years older and sick. I tried desperately to get the door open, but it was as if someone had locked it from the outside. The old woman approached me, still whispering that awful word over and over, without ever taking a breath. I closed my eyes and covered my ears, but my thoughts still couldn't shake that awful word. I slumped to the ground as I felt her footsteps above me. She grabbed me by the arms, and I slowly looked up at her in terror. The last thing I thought before everything went dark was Xikawuul, and I finally realized what it meant. So, what did everyone think of the story? Pretty cliché, I know, but my goal was never to impress anyone with my writing ability. I just wanted to make sure you readers finished reading it, because now I am finally free. I know you're confused, so let me explain myself. First off, I'm not some 23-year-old who loves the supernatural. I figured if I said I was, it would make my story more relatable to all you young people. No, the truth is, I'm a 42-year-old archaeologist who a year ago made a terrible discovery. I'll get back to that in a second, but first, I want to warn all of you about what you just unknowingly did to yourselves. I'm sure many of your first thoughts were about how repetitive the usage of the word in the book was. I'm confident, too, that no one was counting the number of times it was actually said. It really is too bad for you, and trust me, I take no great joy in doing this. But I have to be free. I can't take any more of this torture. I know you're all still confused, but just bear with me. This will all make sense soon. If you were for some reason counting, that word was stated 33 times, including the title. I know that still means nothing to you, but that number is the most important thing that has been said so far in this text. Not 32 and not 34 times, 33 is the magic number. When I first found the real book, I had no idea what the importance of 33 was. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the Nahanni Valley in Canada, but that is where the book was really found. The section where the book was found is known as the Headless Valley to some, due to the tragic deaths that occurred there. It wasn't found in some library, but in one of the most dangerous places I have ever been. I got a call from a friend who told me some local thrill-seeking hikers had stumbled upon the spot when they had to rest for the night due to difficult river conditions. My friend lived in Canada and often looked for places that could potentially contain items with historical significance, and he was well known in the area as the person to contact about such things. I live in Alaska, and I headed towards the site immediately. I had to take a plane first, and then it was a multiple-day boat trip to find the location, and I got an eerie feeling as soon as I arrived. The spot was on the left side of the river, and there was nothing of any real note in the area except for a large rock. This was very close to the spots in the early 1900s, where people seeking gold had been found without their heads. The area that had raised so much attention was between two large trees, and it was marked by a big inscribed stone. The stone read, "What is buried here must remain unseen," and it was dated 1951. I know I should have heeded that warning, but as an archaeologist I couldn't resist my curiosity. We dug it up and discovered the book 6 feet deep. The outside of it did look similar to how I described it earlier. No writing, and what looked like aged leather binding it together. However, the first difference is that the book didn't just say that word over and over. It explained what it was, or should I say, who it was. Yes, that's right, it is a name after all. And as I read more and more of the text, I learned about who the name belonged to. Going forward, I will refer to the name as X, as if I state it again, it will lose its power. When I first found the book, I quickly put it in my backpack as I admit I wanted to discover what it contained myself. No one protested at all, so I didn't worry about it too much. I began to examine it on my trip home and was horrified by what I read. I didn't realize, though, just how screwed I was until the last page. Page 33 made it clear just how much trouble I was truly in, and how much trouble all of you are in now. Even writing this, I can't help but feel relief, along with my extreme guilt for what it is that I'm doing. I think the easiest way for you to understand what the book contains is to show you an excerpt taken from that last page. The previous 32 pages essentially just rambled on about what makes some people worthy and what doesn't. But the last page is what made everything clear. The book was written by a woman named Mary, and I assume in the year 1951. He was called crazy. He spoke to what appeared to be no one. But we know he spoke to the Holy One, the master of us all. The man always sought a life of meaning, and he found just that in the embrace of the Holy One. He was told he must cleanse the non-believers, and he did so, beginning with his family. They were cleansed with fire, 4 souls given without any hesitation. He then appeared to take his own life, but we know the truth. He became much more in death than he ever could in life, and that is when he truly became X. After a week, he returned and chose the ones worthy, including me. He showed us his power and the might of the Holy One. 32 of us were deemed worthy of his gifts, 16 men and 16 women. We were able to speak to him as well, even though we could not comprehend the form he took. We too cleansed the non-believers with fire, and we followed him deeper and deeper into the forest. Any non-believers we found were cleansed, either with flame or by removing their thoughtless heads from their fragile bodies. Each person we killed made him stronger, and he began to morph into something magnificent, greater than any man could be. Our quest was pure, and our path was clear. The great X, guided by the hand of the Holy One, led us from sea to sea, taking the worthless lives of hundreds, every soul making him stronger. Their life energy and fear gave us power. We did not age, and we did not need food or water. We grew taller than any normal man or woman, and had incredible strength. We survived purely off the souls of the ones we killed, and we were in good favor of the Holy One, who continued to strengthen X. After many years, we separated our might and settled in two places. One was a swamp near a small fishing town in Alaska, and the other, where I went, was in a large valley in Canada. The 16 in Alaska hid in the forest and took souls from the townspeople, causing terror and confusion. The remaining 16 of us also continued to take the lives of the ones who came seeking riches. The great X oversaw all of us and was proud of what we accomplished. In the valley where I lived, there are many caves along the river that allowed us to remain unseen and watch anyone who voyaged nearby. The valley was filled with fear, and we thrived here. It is unfortunate that after more than 50 blessed years it had to end. The Alaskan town was abandoned, giving our brothers and sisters no one to feed on anymore. Soon after, we were discovered in the valley, and the unworthy masses grouped together and cornered us in the canyon. Even with our strength, we were outnumbered 20 to 1. They sought vengeance for the souls that we had taken. But before they could end us, the great X ordered us to end ourselves and join him. The 16 from Alaska returned, and we were one again. I was chosen by X to hide and write our story, but once these words are finished, I will join my true family. X said we will have to wait for many years, but we will continue our quest one day. I watched firsthand my brothers and sisters' presence rise again after death, and I know I will too. Without our physical bodies, we can no longer cleanse souls. The great X told us about another way for his power to grow, a way that can never be stopped by any of you pathetic beings. The world has changed, and brute force will no longer accomplish our goals. The mighty X has found a much more insidious way for us to continue our torment of the unworthy. By knowing our quest, you give him strength. Even in death, we can still feed off of your fear. That is why I have recorded our story and have written his name on every one of these 33 pages, just as he instructed. By reading X 33 times, you have become found by us. You are in our gaze now, and we will never let you go. Unless you find many souls for us, all of our focus will be on you. The 33 will never lose power, not as long as you know his name. He will live on forever. Anyone who reads his name in this book will never escape him. We will no longer even have to kill any more of you ourselves. He will be strong enough again one day. He will have his final body, and his master, the Holy One, will descend from the heavens. And that will mean the end of your world. Obviously, I edited the exact excerpt as the first time X was written it spelled out the whole name. But like I said, I couldn't write it any more than 33 times, the same way Mary couldn't. For some more context, this group was stopped by the joint effort of people all across North America who had lost loved ones, as well as the local people of Canada who lived around the Nahanni Valley. There is not much information about who specifically made up this group, but they were the ones who put an end to the spree of killings and seemingly stopped the violence. This information wasn't online anywhere. I only learned of it by speaking to Canadian and Alaskan locals who had the story passed down to them. There seemed to be a conscious effort to forget about what happened, and given what the book stated, I understand why. The woman Mary was found before she ended her life, and the book was taken from her and buried on the spot so that no one would ever read its contents. Before she could be questioned, she was able to leap into the river, and her body was never discovered. There is no real information on who the Holy One described actually is, but I assume it is some ancient, powerful entity. The lead man who took the name X may have originally been named John, but that is not confirmed. Any information about the deaths caused by this group of people does not mention murder or any conscious pattern. Although you can find a path of brutal deaths all across North America from the late 1800s all the way until 1951, I assume they were responsible for most, if not all of them. One way or another, I am positive, they were the cause of all the mysterious deaths in the Nahanni Valley. The Alaskan town I believe to be Port Locke, which had many bizarre deaths before it was completely abandoned in 1950. I do not know this for sure, but the dates line up perfectly, and it would explain a lot. I spoke to people in the area, and they seemed to support this idea. I still do not know where they came from originally, or what the actual significance of the name X is, and why it contains the power it does. I have come to suspect it is from a language that has been intentionally forgotten with time. Truthfully, I don't think I even want to know. I'm sure none of that really matters to you, but I feel as though an explanation is deserved. I wanted to share as much information as possible, considering what is about to happen to you. As the excerpt stated, and I learned all too well, by reading or hearing the name X 33 times, he and the other 32 turn their gaze upon you. 33 times for each one of the monsters that were responsible for the deaths of hundreds, including their own families. I didn't know what that meant at first, but I quickly found out. Shortly after returning home, my hair began to fall out, and I started to experience the dream I described in the fictional story. Next, my grandparents both passed away suddenly. They were very old, but it still happened so quick. My long-distance girlfriend decided to call it off with me for reasons I didn't understand. And only 4 days after that, my cousin was hit by a car and became paralyzed. My house burned down a week later, and I had to move into a much smaller apartment. I realized pretty fast that this was all because of what I had read in the book, and I began to believe all of it was true. I contracted a cold that still hasn't abated in over 10 months, and no matter how many times I shower, I always have a terrible smell. In general, I always have bad luck. Nothing ever goes my way, and I always feel very down. I began to suspect that my life was coming to an end. No matter where I went, I felt like I was being watched. I considered suicide, but I realized I had one last option to try. I brought this plague upon myself by reading the name of the entity 33 times. But I remembered the book said it can be passed to others to take the focus off of yourself. I debated my options. Writing X 33 times simply wouldn't work, and no one would listen to me say it that many times. Then it finally dawned on me. If I created a fake story about it that seemed to be purely for entertainment, I could slip it in 33 times without drawing attention. I didn't care if the story was good, I just needed it to at least keep the reader engaged until they had read it all 33 times. I don't know if 20 people will read this or 100, but I do know at least some people will, and I am relieved that the gaze will no longer purely be on me. I would now like to take this time to apologize to you all. It doesn't bring me any joy to do this, but I had to stop the pain and torment. I do believe that you will not experience as much bad luck as I have, but I will not pretend I know that for sure. All you can do now is continue to share this story to others to deflect from the gaze. In doing so, we will be introducing this evil back into the world, but I don't know any other way to help ourselves. Don't lose all hope. Share the story and do whatever you can to try and find ways to stop these monsters. I truly believe if someone can find a way to understand the name X and its meaning, power can be taken from it. I am going to travel to Port Locke to try and find anything I can to help. I don't have high hopes, but since I am in the same state as what remains of the town, I figure it is at least worth a shot. I really do hope one of you can find a way to end this once and for all. Truthfully though, I am just happy that I'll finally be able to rest. It's been so long since I actually slept. I wish all of you good luck and trust me, you will need it. As the echoes of our first tale fade into the silence, we turn the page to a darker chapter. Prepare to descend further into the abyss of fear with our second narration. The shadows whisper, and the unknown beckons. Let us heed their call. Cryptic Chronicles presents Night at the Inwell House. A smile covers my face as I look up to see Emily looking down at me as I awake from my nap. I never really took work seriously, something she always got after me for. But waking up to see her beautiful golden silky hair, her bright blue eyes resembling the waters of the Maldives, and, well, her figure wasn't anything to scoff at either. This was enough to make me not care about napping on the job. "What is it this time, honey?" I ask with a smirk. She rolled her eyes before pulling me up from the chair. "Come on, it's getting pretty busy now. I know we come in early, but you are leaving me and Matthew with all the bagging and scanning." I sigh and stand up. We live in a relatively small town where, for the most part, everyone knows each other. We work in a local supermarket with the lovely name of Super Emporium. Although there isn't anything super about it. It's a small, dingy store known for its relatively low prices of meat and fish. The size of the store is small, and Emily, Matthew, and I are the only ones who work here during the day. I walk over to the checkout counter, following behind Emily, giving her small glances and checking her out. Ever since I met her, she's been the joy of my life. We have been going strong for 3 years now, and I've been saving up for a ring. I see Matthew bagging a few items for the current customer checking out. Emily gives me a little shove towards the checkout as I ring them up. Matthew, a bit of an older man, finished bagging, sending the customer on their way home, and walked over to me. "Hey, Cole." I could smell the nicotine coming from his breath. He had a smoking addiction he could never really overcome, sneaking a few during work in the break room. How the smoke detector has never gone off is beyond me, but me and Emily suspect he took out the batteries. Not like it matters. It is his business, after all, a family-owned store he inherited after the passing of his father. He looks at me with a small smile. Ever since his divorce, he's been different. He seems less motivated, and I can't help but feel pity that we are the last thing he has. His only friends. "What's up, Matthew?" "Sorry about sleeping in, but you know how it goes." "Oh, don't sweat it, Cole." He gives me a sad smile. Emily was being a bit dramatic. It isn't that busy like usual. Emily looks over at us, overhearing Matthew's comment, with a look of annoyance as she shoots us a middle finger before going back to her duties. I then stand there awkwardly with Matthew before I excuse myself to go back to helping a few customers waiting at the checkout. A few hours pass and I finish work. Emily gets in my car as usual and I drop her off at her place before going to my home. It's a nice house, big enough to fit 5 people and still have a room to spare. I live with one of my good friends, Gary. I've known him since we were children. He loves hunting in the local woods and owns a small jerky shop in a nearby plaza. I enter the home, greeted by the scent of manly musk, as I see Gary shirtless on the couch, eating ice cream from the tub and watching TV. "Bro, really? You smell like ass. I can smell you from here," I grumble as I take off my jacket and hang it on the rack near the door. "Mellow out, man. It's not a big deal." He gives me that stupid grin he does when he knows he is annoying, and besides, who gives a shit? It's just us anyways. I roll my eyes and head upstairs to change out of my work uniform and put on some pajama pants and a t-shirt before heading back down to watch some TV with Gary. We sat there in silence, only breaking it to crack jokes and make fun of the show we were watching before calling it a night. I head upstairs and give Emily a call. She quickly answers, and she already sounds tired. I can't blame her. It's late and we have to wake up early. "Hey babe," I say into the phone. "Sorry for calling late. I lost track of time watching TV with Gary." "It's fine," she mumbles into the phone before letting out a long yawn. "I am so tired I don't want to stay on the phone that long, Cole." "I understand, honey. Don't worry, we will see each other tomorrow, okay?" "Yeah, she said again in a tired voice. "Good night, Cole. I love you. Hope you dream about me," she says in a joking manner, yet still I know a part of her meant it. "Ha yay, you know I always do. Good night, Emily. Love you too." I waited for her to hang up the phone before letting out a sigh and jumping on the bed. It's going to be a long night, I think to myself as I close my eyes. A calming feeling washes over me as I remember the scent of Emily as I drift off to bed. Roses and vanilla fill my nostrils as I see her in my dream. I can see the perfect picture of us, me and her together with a small child in her arms as we both look down at it with proud looks on our faces. Oh, how it would be amazing. The dream continues as it's me and her playing with our child. We look proud seeing its first steps before looking into each other's eyes. Our faces get closer and closer, our lips pursed as I lay a hand on her cheek, pulling her into a knock, knock, knock. I open my eyes confused by the sound. My room was pitch black, nothing but the silent buzz of the TV in my room. Am I imagining things? I ask myself as I look around. Knock, knock, knock. There it was, again a frantic knocking sound. This wasn't in my head. I stand up from the bed looking at the door. The only person in this house is Gary, so who else could it be? "Gary, everything all right?" No response, instead greeted with another loud knocking on my door. I stand up from my bed, stumbling in the darkness of my room as I head toward the door. I reach my hand for the sleek metallic doorknob before hearing another loud knock startling me as I fall backward. Shit, hello? Who is it? You're starting to creep me out, Gary. This shit isn't funny. No response again. I stand up ready to open the door before I hear a soft voice coming from the other end. "Cole, you there?" It was Emily, her voice as charming and melodic as ever to my ears. "Yeah, hey, Emily." I chuckle nervously. "Geez, were you trying to scare me, babe? 'Cause, well, it worked." I began laughing at her little prank. I gave Emily the keys to the house a few weeks ago, although she never really did much with them. I guess tonight she missed me too much or something. I rationalized to myself for her weird behavior as I opened the door. "I guess you need Daddy to scratch that itch again, huh, babe?" My voice drops as I twist the door open, greeted by nothing on the other end. Darkness. Nothing but darkness in the hall. She wasn't there. "Emily?" I call out for her, yet no response. "Emily, I know you're here. Come on, it's late. No need to try to scare me. Let's just go to bed, huh?" I say in an annoyed tone due to her antics. I hear her voice from downstairs. "Come, honey, let's eat breakfast." Breakfast? I think to myself. Breakfast this late? Has she lost her mind? I began heading downstairs when I asked, "Emily, is everything all right? Why are you just wandering in the house in darkness anyway?" I turn on the lights in the kitchen. Nothing. It was empty. My heart sank as I got a weird feeling in my stomach. She was here. She knocked on my door and I heard her voice clearly. What the hell was going on? Gary walks down a few minutes later. "What's up with all the racket, Cole? Can you not make so much noise at fucking 4 a.m? He sounded pissed, and the look on his face confirmed that thought. "Did you hear her?" I ask. "Did you hear Emily?" "What? No? What the fuck are you on about, dude? Go to sleep. Jesus, don't do that weird shit again, man. I know you want to marry the woman, but fucking hell, I am trying to sleep, and you are over here screaming, 'Emily, come to daddy.'" He mocks me before heading back to his room in a grumble, saying obscenities to me. At any other moment, I probably would have been upset with his attitude. But something was wrong. He didn't hear Emily. How is that possible? Her voice was clear, and there was no way I could just imagine something like that, right? I head back into my room, paranoid, and head back to sleep, waking up the next morning. The day went slow, and I went through work as if nothing happened until I couldn't hold it in anymore, and confronted Emily about it in the break room. "Hey, Emily, did you, come over to my place last night?" I ask, unsure about the question myself. "No? she said, confused. Why do you ask? Nothing, I just thought I heard you last night. But I never saw you, and Gary said he didn't hear anything either. But I swear I heard you knocking on my bedroom door and talking to me. I say, a little worried now. The events of last night felt too real to be fake. I noticed that Matthew overheard our conversation as he walked over to us. You thought you heard her, you say, but Gary said he didn't. I nod to his comment and respond, yeah. Matthew shakes his head. Emily pays attention to his words as well. I feel her hand on my shoulder as she rubs it, noticing the distress on my face, trying to comfort me. Well, call me crazy, but I am a big believer in the supernatural. He said quietly, Look, Cole, I know you probably won't believe me, but I think you might have a mimic on your hands. I scoffed in disbelief, but a part of me wanted to believe him. What happened last night felt too real for it to just be in my head. What if he is right? You're joking, right? I say in shock at his proposition. He shakes his head. Look, Cole, you have two options. Either you are crazy or it's a mimic. You have all the signs, it's one as well. The perfect sound of someone you know, but no clear source knocks on your door. I mean, come on, is it really that crazy? He chuckles as if he was talking to an idiot. I looked at him with a scowl on my face as much as I wanted to deny it. His words were scaring me. I was never a firm believer of the supernatural, but I always thought maybe, just maybe, there are things in this world we can't understand. Look, Matthew, I seriously doubt all that. You are speaking out your ass trying to scare me. It was probably just in my head. He shrugs. Suit yourself, just putting in my input and thoughts. If anything else happens, let us know, all right? We are friends after all. He gave me a sincere look before walking out of the break room. I look over at Emily, who just hugs me. Let me know if anything else happens, okay, babe? I believe what you say is true. You have no reason to lie to us. I nod and kiss her. The rest of the day goes by fine, and I head back home. Gary is doing his usual thing. I hear music blaring from his room, and considering he goes to the bar on Fridays, I could imagine what's going on in that room. I head into my room and change into something more comfortable. I head into the kitchen and pop open a cold beer. I sit on the couch and put on the music from Gary's room, louder than the TV itself. After about what seemed like an hour, the music goes off and sees Gary come downstairs with a girl. Both of them were sweaty. The girl's hair was ruffled and plastered on her face. Meanwhile, Gary was drenched. I could smell their shame and musk from the couch as he ushered the girl out of the house. Looks like you had a good time, huh? I take a swig from my beer and offer him the bottle. Want a swig? Gary takes the beer from my hand with a groan and takes a drink and hands it back. Shut up, Cole. I didn't know you'd be here so early. He looks at the clock. Take that back. I guess I didn't know it would take so long. I laugh and stand up and pat his back. Yeah, man. Before I head into the kitchen, he grabs my shoulder. Yo, Cole, about last night. He had a face of worry. Everything all right, bro? You seemed pretty convinced about all that shit, but I didn't hear none. I sigh and nod. Yeah, everything is all right, Gary. I probably was just missing Emily like you said. I didn't want to tell him about the mimic theory Matthew threw at me. Neither did I want to accept that as a reality. Gary walks away and heads back into his room, and I sit at the kitchen table pondering. I was scared to go back to my room and sleep. It was about to be 11 p.m., and I didn't want to move. I didn't want to risk that happening again. Even though I knew it wasn't real, a part of me was doubtful. Fatigue started to get to me. I am overreacting, I think, as I stand up and start heading toward my room. It's late, I got to sleep. This is me being stupid. I walk into my room and lay in bed. I close my eyes and soon I fall into a deep slumber. I dream about Emily again, well more so a memory of our first date. I sit with her at the pier of the beach as she smiles at me. Hey, You know, this was quite fun. Her hands moved closer to mine. We should do this again sometime. I haven't felt this happy in a while. I nod. Yeah, I agree. This was a nice time. We both look over at the sunset, our hands now touching as we watch the sun go over the horizon. So beautiful, Emily mumbles. Not as beautiful as you. I blush a little embarrassed from my cheesy comment, but Emily laughs. Oh, how sweet. Well, you're not so bad yourself, she jokes as she scoots closer and rests her head on my shoulder. I stroke her hair as the world around us goes dark, the sun now gone. We stay there in the same position before she stands up. Come on, we should go now. This was fun. I agree and I try to stand up. I couldn't move. My chest begins to feel heavy as I try to move. I start wheezing as if something is lying on top of me. I am taken out of my dream, the same feeling as if something laying on my chest remains. After a while, my eyes adjust to the darkness, and that's when I see it. On top of me lay a woman with bruised skin, tattered in dirt. Its black hair was matted on its face. Her long, dirty nails caressed my chest as she stared at me with her black, sunken eyes. She then spoke. Her voice was so mesmerizing, like the singing of birds. It was the voice of the woman I love. "Hello, Cole." It said in Emily's voice, "I've missed you." The creature then smiled at me, her teeth crooked and black. It was appalling. I wanted to run, but I was stuck there unable to move. No matter what my brain told my body to do, it would not function. The creature, the mimic, then stood up. I noticed her belly grow and grow as if she was pregnant. I watch in horror as I watch this unfold. I see a baby begin to crown and the mimic yells. I still can't move or run as I watch this creature give birth to a baby with sickly grey skin and pure black eyes. The baby doesn't cry. It remains silent as tears of this black liquid pour out of its eyes. The mimic brings the baby towards me with a sick smile. "Look, Cole, it's our baby boy." The mimic seems ecstatic about it and brings the baby to me, holding up to my face as I lay on the bed unable to move, unable to scream for help. I watch as the baby turns its head to me and in a deep, demonic voice, it says, "Papa." Suddenly, the baby begins to vomit the same black fluid leaking from its eyes onto my face. I feel a burning pain as this corrosive fluid lands on me. I try to move, I try to cry, but I just can't. The baby then stops, and the mimic then throws it to the side of the room as it splats onto the wall. It didn't care for its life, almost as if it was some sort of tool for it to use. The mimic grabs me by my hair and drags me to the mirror. "Look, Cole," it said in a demented way. The same voice the baby had, no longer hiding its true nature and hiding behind Emily's voice. "You are as beautiful as me." I see my face in the mirror and the skin on my face flayed. I could see the muscles of my face, parts of the muscle were completely gone, revealing the bone underneath. The mimic brushes its nails against my face and pierces my eyes. The pain was unbearable, yet I could not scream. I could feel my blood run down my body. I wanted to cry. I wanted this nightmare to be over. I just wanted my life to be normal again. The rest of what happens is a bit fuzzy. Since I was blinded, I did not know what other torture the mimic made me go through. All I was able to do was feel it, but eventually my brain just shut itself off. I awoke in the morning back in my bed. I look around, touch my face, and notice my vision is back. I look around the blood stain of the baby now gone. It was as if nothing happened. I head over to the bathroom and look in the mirror. My body was untouched. I looked around for any sign of what happened last night, but there was nothing to show for it. I head downstairs to see Gary, who immediately shoots me a weird look. "God damn, bro. Looks like you've seen a ghost," he says with a little bit of a worried look. "Yeah, well, I guess that's one way to put it," I reply as I grab the coffee pot and serve myself a cup. I look back at him, seeing his worried face. I want to tell him, but I am scared he will think I am crazy. It was just a bad dream, that's all, I lied, trying to give him some closure about me. Besides, I don't look that bad, just lost a little sleep, that's all. I grin and walk out of the kitchen before he could respond, not wanting to talk about it. I walk out of the house, mug in hand, and get in my car. I start driving, not knowing where I am going. I begin to break down in tears. I can't figure out what's happening to me. This thing, it won't leave me alone. I haven't said this, but I see it in the corner of my eye now, watching. As I drive, I can see it in the rear-view mirror sitting in the back seat. I can't escape it no matter what I try. It stays with me idle, waiting for me to sleep, and I hear a yell, and my tires screech to a halt as I feel my car go over a bump. I get out of my car and see a woman holding her child on the floor. I can't wrap my head around it as I look back at my car, noticing the street streaked with red tire marks on the floor. The baby's head looked abnormally flat, with blood littering the floor, like some kind of horror movie set. I keep looking back and forth, barely able to hear the gurgles of the dying mother. All the creature did was smile. Why was it following me? What does it want from me? Why won't it just kill me? I look back at the mother and baby and am left with no other option. I get in my car and drive away. I keep driving, my mind blank, unable to believe what I just did. I didn't dare look at my rear-view mirror anymore. I knew it was there. I didn't have to look. It was breathing down my neck. After a long drive, I arrived back home, not even bothering to say hi to Gary. I run into the bathroom and lock myself in as I begin to vomit, disgusted with myself. How could I just leave those two to die? Jesus, I killed a child and its mother in a hit and run, I thought to myself as I continued to vomit. I look up at the mirror to see it behind me. The same being pretending to be the girl I love, except this time it was slightly different. It no longer looked like her, but instead a decaying corpse, too run down to even figure out how she looked prior. I turned around to face it as it stood there idle. It was missing an eye, its flesh rotten and filled with maggots and worms wriggling under the grey, paper-thin flesh. Its face bore a smile too wide for any human to manage. There were no teeth, just gums. I look away from it as I vomit again from its putrid appearance. And I feel it touch me as it whispers to me in Emily's voice. "You did good there, Cole. You did exactly what I wanted." I turned around, screaming, trying to push it away, but it was gone, as if it was never there. I began to cry. I couldn't take it anymore. This thing made me a murderer. It's as if it's living in my mind. After a while, I leave the bathroom with my brain in shambles as I just walk into my bedroom and lie down. I was nothing but a vegetable for the rest of the day. I didn't pay much attention, but managed to hear Gary telling me he was going to stay over at a friend's house. I didn't see the creature for the rest of the day. Later that night, I got a call from my girlfriend. I answered, waiting for her to speak first. "Hey, Cole, is everything all right? I am worried about you, babe. You missed work today. You want me to come over?" she said in her sweet voice. But for me, it was nothing but haunting as my heart sped up hearing it. I couldn't tell if it was her or that mimic creature, demon, whatever it was. I took a deep breath and finally responded after a long pause. "Yes, Emily, I would like you to come over. I've been having issues with the mimic or whatever. Maybe it is all in my head and having you over might help put me at ease." I rationalize with myself. After talking to her for a little longer, I hung up the phone. She agreed to stop by around 8 p.m., leaving me with about 2 hours to prepare for her visit. I lay on my bed contemplating everything. How did my life go to hell because of this? I am a murderer. I don't know what to do. I hope maybe if I can see Emily, this might all blow over. Sure, I killed someone, but if no one knows, did it really happen? Jesus, look at me with these terrible thoughts. It wasn't like I did it. The mimic. The thing made me. I leave my room and head downstairs, and decide to start cooking. Since she will be coming here late, I thought I'd treat her with a nice dinner. I wasn't an amazing cook, but I managed through some video tutorials and a messy kitchen. I finally finished making the lasagna. I set it so it can cool as I waited for Emily, the mimic, nowhere in sight. Finally, I hear a knock on the door and go open to be greeted by an angel. I look at her in awe. She pulled me into a kiss and smiled at me, causing my heart to flutter as I doted on her, touching her hair and pulling her into a hug. I couldn't believe it was actually her. After being tormented by this thing pretending to be her, here she was in my arms, smiling. I let her inside and we walked to the kitchen as she sat. I serve us both a piece of the lasagna. I could see her physically cringe after taking a bite, but she powered through it, knowing I took time and tried at least to make her dinner. "Wow, Cole, this was really nice of you to do," she smiles. "Well, I am all full. Babe, thanks so much again, but next time I think we should order food so you don't have to do so much work. Okay, honey?" She takes the plate and places it into the sink, before coming back to me, wrapping her arms around me as I finish eating. "You are so cute, you know that? You do so much to try to make me happy. It's only right I try to make you happy, darling. Come on, once you finish eating. Let's watch that one show you were telling me about. Breaking Bad or something. I know you wanted to watch it with me." She walked away and headed toward the living room. Once I finished eating and cleaning the dishes after incessantly refusing Emily's pleas to let her do it so I could relax, I headed toward the living room, plopping myself onto the couch as she held me in her arms, stroking my hair. "So are we going to watch it or not?" she asked sweetly. Her voice felt like ecstasy in my ears. "Yes, hun, we are," I respond as I put on the show. We sat and watched Breaking Bad, hooked on it. Every time we said last one, we would start another, wanting to know what would happen. Eventually, we both agreed it was too late, so we headed to bed. I held her in my arms while lying on the bed, touching her hair and kissing her. The movements of her hips as she grinded on me made us heated as we both knew what we wanted to do. We made love that night. Despite us doing it almost weekly, it was different this time. Instead of the usual lustful pleasure, it was more pure, and I must say, it was probably the best session that we ever had. We really did love each other, and tonight we expressed it the best we could have in private, just me and her and no one else. Afterward we talked, and she explained to me that she was going to go help her mum tomorrow at the homeless shelter, like she did every other week, but she said she was also volunteering at a hospital. I asked if I could join her, but she said all the positions were filled, and she would ask to see if it was still possible and let me know as soon as possible. Finally, we both drifted off to sleep. I had forgotten all about what happened. I no longer cared about the mimic or the people I ran over. I had no worries at all now that the one thing that kept me going was here in my bed, sleeping with me. I woke up later that night. I reached over Emily to grab my water, touching gently before recoiling back. I get off the bed as my eyes adjust to the darkness, and I notice my hands covered in maggots. I yell, wiping them off and turning on the lights to see the mimic in the spot where Emily had been sleeping. It stared at me, its eyes burning into my soul as it stood up with that smile. It looked like it did when I first met it. A woman with her skin covered in dirt and bruised, her deep black sunken eyes, and long dirty nails. "What did you do with Emily?" I yelled in fear and anger. It just stared at me silently before opening its mouth and speaking in Emily's voice. "Cole, are you okay?" "It's me, Emily," it said as it walked closer to me, reaching its long dirt hand towards me. I slap it away before punching it in the nose. I was no longer afraid of it. I was enraged. I don't know what it did to Emily, but I have had enough of its shit. I ran toward the kitchen as I heard the mimic call for my name, as it chased me still using Emily's voice. I rummaged through the drawers, looking for any weapon, before finding a large combat knife from the junk drawer that Gary probably left in there. I confront the mimic as it stares at me. Cole is everything all. I cut off the mimic when I sliced the knife toward it, leaving a gashing wound on its arm. Blood spills on the floor as I watch it writhe in pain, holding its arm. Cole, what the hell is wrong with you? The mimic yells in her voice. It was trying to trick me. It still thought it could trap me, but that just left it open for another strike. I slice at it with the knife again as it lifts up its hands to protect its face, causing me to cut through her wrists and arms as I berate it with slashes from the knife. Its yells in Emily's voice pained me to my core, but I knew I couldn't stop. This was my only chance to finally dispose of this demon. I eventually cut its arms and wrists to the point they give away as it can no longer hold them up. For the first time, it had a look of fear in its eyes. Cole, please stop. You're gonna kill me. Please stop. We can talk. It yelled in her voice, but I wasn't having it. I tackle it to the floor and get on top of it as I bring down my knife into its chest over and over and over again. Its blood splatters all over me as I continue to jab the blade into its torso. I get off of her, thinking it's finally dead as I look down at its body twitching and groaning. The floor is littered with both dried and fresh blood. The room smelt like iron. I look at the knife covered in blood, my clothes drenched in the same red fluid. I look at it as it moves again, trying to drag itself. I grab it by the hair, pulling its head up, and press the knife against its neck. This was it. Finally, the horror will be over. I slowly pull the knife across its neck, savoring the sound of the flesh and muscle getting sliced, watching the blood spill out like an overflowing pool. I finish dragging the blade across a massive gash now through its neck. I drop it as I hear it gurgling while watching its last few moments alive. It was finally over. It was dead. Patient name, Cole Inwell. Occupation, store clerk. Reason for hospitalization, murder, untreated schizophrenia. Case, murdered Emily Sherman due to a psychotic episode of untreated schizophrenia. Cole believed Emily was a hallucination he calls the mimic. He was found by Gary Warner drenched in blood, standing over Emily's body. The cops were called and Cole was soon arrested, where he pleaded insanity. He was tested and put into the Sulcan Mental Institute, where he currently remains. Biopsy later reported that Emily died of excessive blood loss and organ failure. Her body was found with 46 stab wounds and a slit throat. Her family was given all the details except for one that the police department agreed to keep classified. During the biopsy, a 3-week-old fetus was found in her womb. She died pregnant. I drop the file on my desk and sigh as I grab my lab coat and head toward room 132, where Cole Inwell resides. I open the door and enter and see Cole sitting on his bed with a smile on his face. "Hello, Dr. Henderson," Cole replies, looking me dead in the eyes. "Is it time for my meds?" I nod and hand him a small paper cup with different medication and hand him a glass of water. He seemed more happy than usual. I left him in his room shortly after to go fill in some paperwork. The day went on relatively quickly. When I finally headed home, I was greeted by my dog and wife. Before I could set anything down, I received a message on my pager. Cole had taken his own life. I lay down on my couch contemplating. I had heard his story. It was tragic. If he just had the proper treatment, it all could have been prevented. But in the back of my mind, I always had a nagging feeling that what if? What if his story wasn't a lie? What if the mimic was real? I hear my wife call me from the kitchen. She died 3 years ago. As we leave behind the haunting echoes of our second tale, a new shiver awaits. Brace yourself as we venture into the third narrative, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. Dare to follow as we unravel the next enigma in our chronicle of horror. Cryptic Chronicles presents This is not real. You need to wake up. "Have a good night, Roman," the receptionist said to me as I walked past her desk while she was getting ready to close up. I smiled and waved as I left the gym and entered the brisk night air. Checking the time as my stomach made a gurgling sound, I saw that it was 9:47 p.m. and every fast food place in my small town would be closed by now. I looked across the road and saw that the local grocery store was open until 10, so I started lightly jogging towards it, the cold breeze biting through my clothes and attacking my face and neck since I didn't dry off my hair properly after showering. A wave of warmth hit me in the face as I stepped into the store, causing my eyes to water slightly. "Attention shoppers, the store will be closing in 10 minutes, so please start making your way to the checkouts. Thank you and have a good night," a woman's voice echoed over the intercom. I hurriedly grabbed a pre-made sandwich and headed towards the drinks aisle. With my head down, I walked, reading the label of my less than exciting dinner, and I decided I would grab another sandwich on my way out. When I looked up, I found myself staring into the aisle I had entered, only to see my ex-girlfriend Natalie standing there with her boyfriend, Ari. Her eyes met mine, and I started to tear up again, but not because of the temperature of the air. She broke her gaze and continued talking to Ari, her expression never changing from the smile she had already been wearing before she saw me. I looked away and started making my way to the end of the aisle, walking past them, but not acknowledging them in the slightest. As I brushed past Ari, I realized how much bigger he was than me, at least 3 or 4 inches taller and probably a good 20 kilos heavier. For reference, I'm 6'2" and weigh 92 kilos lean, so I'm not small by any stretch, but this guy dwarfed me. As I grabbed a Red Bull, I wondered to myself why it had hit me that hard. It had been years since I dated her and years since she drifted out of my life. We were 16 when she confessed her feelings for me 5 years ago now. We had been good friends before that, and we were still good friends after I broke up with her. But I took her for granted, so when she started becoming a less consistent part of my life, I was too stubborn to tell her that I missed her. I was snapped out of my own internal dialogue suddenly as my phone started vibrating in my pocket, emitting a strange analog beeping sound that I hadn't heard it make before. I looked around to see Natalie and Ari looking confused while also staring at their phones. "This is an emergency alert. Get to the nearest enclosed structure immediately. Close and lock all doors and windows, turn off all the lights, and do not make any noise that will be detectable from outside the structure. If you are in your house, close the blinds and fill as many containers with water as you can. If you are in a public structure, such as a store or a recreational facility, then follow as many of those same steps as you can. If you are in a vehicle, shut off the engine and lock the doors. For all who are listening to this alert, do not look into the fog, and under no circumstances should you go outside. This alert will repeat once every 12 hours, and any updates will be shared periodically. You should be prepared to stay indoors for at least a week. This is not a drill. Stand by for updates." All the phones in the store blared in unison. There was a moment of complete silence as the few late-night customers in the store looked over to the closing staff, who were just as dumbfounded as everyone else. Then the store broke out into a hurried panic as who I assume was the store supervisor made her way to the back of the store to shut off the lights, while the other 2 ladies who were at the checkouts began to lock the doors. I went to call Marcus, my mate who's in the Air Force, to ask what the hell is going on, but there was no signal at all. "Nah, fuck this, bro," Ari shouted in anger as he grabbed Natalie by the wrist and started walking her over to the sliding glass door that was in the process of being locked. As the lights all dimmed out row by row, we were all left in pitch-black darkness, excluding the glowing sign of the service station across the street and the barely visible streetlights outside that were being drowned out by the thick fog that everyone had just noticed. Ari turned on his phone's flashlight and kept walking in the darkness until Natalie pulled away from him. "We can't go out there, Ari. There's something wrong with that fog," Natalie yelled at her partner. "Let me out right fucking now," Ari shouted at the poor lady who had just locked the place up. "I can't do that, sir," she replied softly, causing him to start banging on the glass, threatening to break it. "Ari, please, calm down, babe. Can't we just wait until we know what's going on?" Natalie begged as she grabbed Ari's forearm and attempted to stop him from shattering the only thing separating us from the strange mist outside. "Dude, come on. You don't know what's out there," I interrupted. "It could be a chemical attack or something. Just at least wait until we get an update, man." I tried to reason, but it was no use. "Fuck you, pussy. I'm not getting held against my will in a supermarket." "Who the hell would chemical attack New Zealand, dumbass?" He responded to my reasoning. This is something I had already been thinking. It wouldn't explain why we had to turn the lights out, and it wouldn't explain why we had to remain quiet. But I was hoping that he wouldn't be able to think all that through. "Let me out! What the fuck don't you understand, bitch?" he shouted, at the top of his lungs as he shoved Natalie off his arm and onto the hard epoxy floor, then resumed his banging on the glass. But much harder now. "You gotta let him out," I said to the grocery worker as I helped Natalie to her feet. The rest of the dozen customers who were in the store had crowded behind us, watching the whole thing go down. "He's gonna get us all killed if he breaks that glass," I argued. "Let him out." The worker reluctantly put in the code for the door's automatic opening system to activate, and the glass began to slide to the side. Ari looked back at Natalie in rage, seeing that she was not going to leave with him. The large man then walked out, and the doors shut behind him, immediately being locked by the store lady whose hands were now shaking. We all watched in silence as Ari's silhouette disappeared into the fog until the only thing we could make out was his phone's flashlight, gently glowing through the mist. All of a sudden, it seemed like he had stopped moving. The light didn't get any dimmer or seem to be getting further away at all. As around 17 of us observed from the darkness of the grocery store, a loud shriek was released into the night, and Ari began sprinting back to the door, and his banging resumed. "Let me the fuck back in! There's something out here!" he began to shout, but was cut off as his legs were pulled out from under him and the wind was knocked out of his lungs as he landed hard on his stomach, his nose cracking on the concrete. Natalie went to scream, but I covered her mouth, and we both watched as Ari was dragged back into the fog by a tall, lanky humanoid silhouette, still clutching onto his phone. Eventually, the light from his flashlight was completely engulfed by the wall of fog, and we were all left with our mouths agape and tears in our eyes as the severity of our situation set in. Nobody really said much over the next couple of hours. Everyone was too shaken up, I guess. At around 12:15 a.m., I checked my phone as Natalie lay on top of me, fast asleep, her face buried into my hoodie. She had been crying since... Well, we all watched what happened to Ari. After that, everyone found a place to themselves, and Natalie held on to me, soaking my shoulder with her tears, which made their way down to my skin. I hated that I was happy at that moment. I felt so selfish about being content in her sorrow, but I missed her so much. I missed her more than I let myself know, and was just thankful that I had her there with me. I thanked God that I didn't have to go through this nightmare alone. I fell asleep shortly after, closing my eyes and taking in the noises around me. The humming of the fridges, Natalie's soft breathing, gentle sobs from across the store, and I'm sure a couple of times I heard screams in the distance outside the apparent security of this store. I awoke to my phone vibrating again, but it was only my 7:30 a.m. alarm. Natalie must have already been awake because she was holding me tight, and there were fresh tears on my hoodie. I lay there for a bit, hugging her, ignorant to the world that for all I knew was ending anyway. I was also ignorant to the fact that the sun hadn't come up, or at least it wasn't reaching us through the fog, meaning that it must be completely encasing us. How far does the fog stretch? How far would it have to extend into the sky for not even a hint of daylight to shine through? These are questions I did not have because I was holding on to the girl who I had never really stopped loving, making me probably the only person at that moment who was trapped in a dream, not a nightmare. Natalie and I ate breakfast in silence. I guess there are worse places to be trapped than a well-stocked grocery store. However, as 10 a.m. rolled around, a new alert sounded out from everyone's phones. This is an emergency alert. It is still very unsafe outside, so stay where you are. Keep all the lights off, and do not make any noise that will be detectable from outside your structure. Avoid looking into the fog or standing in a position where you are visible from the outside. Cover as many windows as possible and preferably hide in a room that can be locked off from the rest of your structure if necessary. If something is in your structure or is trying to get inside, then it knows you're there. In this scenario, hide. Do not attempt to confront it under any circumstances. Notable updates. The electrical and water systems will not be operational by this time tomorrow, so if you have not done so, fill up as many containers with water as you can. You will receive another alert every 12 hours. Thank you. Stand by for any updates. I stood up and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back from sitting on the hard supermarket floor, and my legs had pins and needles. I looked down at Natalie, who seemed lost in thought. I wasn't sure if she had heard the update, but then again, what did it matter? The loss of power would mean that all the refrigerated items would spoil, but there was enough long-lasting food to feed us all for months, probably, drinks as well. I knew our biggest problem would be warmth, as we would lose the electronic heating system. But before I could think any more on that, a commotion broke out on the other side of the store. A loud crash echoed across the whole building, and as Natalie and I made our way towards the noise, we discovered that one of the other guys who was trapped in here, must have been in his late 50s at least, had been using his free time to get absolutely wasted in the alcoholic section of the store, and was now yanking boxes of booze off of the shelves as he drunkenly laughed to himself. Before I could do anything, another man, maybe in his early 30s, tackled him to the ground and pinned him down, all without saying a word. As the older guy lay there, asking what the problem was in slurred, barely comprehensible English, everyone in the store felt their hearts sink, as a loud thumping sound was heard from the front door, and then again, and again, until one of the 3 store workers, who wandered over to see who was over there, let out an almost impossibly loud scream, and that was what sealed our fate. The store erupted into chaos as the glass door was shattered, and an inhuman shriek reverberated in our ears as whatever was outside was no longer outside. I looked to Natalie, who appeared to be frozen in place, teary-eyed as she breathed rapid and shallow breaths. I took her by the hand and ran as fast as I could towards the storage room out back. I knew they had to have one in order to hold on to the stock, that they couldn't fit on the shelves yet. But as we reached the door, screams and roars filled the store behind us. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that it was locked. I shook the handle out of desperation and then tried to open the other larger door that the forklifts came in and out of, but I didn't know the code. I embraced Natalie, and I guess I just prepared for it to end until I heard a psst and looked back over to the door to see that the store supervisor was holding it slightly ajar while gesturing for us to quickly come inside. We ran to the entrance and left the main part of the building, where we found the supervisor and the other surviving employee, along with one other customer who had apparently been in here ever since Ari was killed. The lights were on in the storage room because there were no windows, which took a while to adjust to after being in total darkness for the last 12 hours. But it was a nice change. Over the course of the day, we heard many thumps and bangs. Occasionally, something would get knocked over and glass would smash. Whatever was out there was looking everywhere for survivors, but we were safe in here. Natalie and I made a bed out of a few 20-kilo sacks of rice, which was honestly so much nicer than the floor. The other 3 people in there with us tried to ask us about ourselves, our lives, but I did most of the talking. Natalie was still grieving, and the others understood that, though I did see her smile a couple of times, which was nice. The other employee didn't say much. I assumed it was because of what happened to the female staff member after the door shattered, so I didn't really try to push him for conversation. Honestly, I wasn't really in a social mood myself, but it was just nice to have some sense of normalcy after the shit show that has been our lives over the last couple of days. On day 4, I remembered what the alert had said about the power shutting off. It turns out there's a backup generator that should power everything we need for another couple of days, with most of the lights in the store being off, so it really felt like we were home free. At 10 o'clock on the 4th night, I heard the emergency alert sound off from across the room as I lay next to Natalie. Since both of our phones had died already, I tried to listen in on what it was saying, but I couldn't quite make it out from where I was. So I got up in the dark and made my way over to the soft glow of the supervisor's phone screen. By the time I could hear what was being said, I only just caught the end of it. Be prepared to stay inside indefinitely. You will receive another alert every 12 hours. Thank you. Stand by for any updates. My heart sank to my stomach hearing this, and as I looked over to the supervisor who shared my expression, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Indefinitely? I mean, it would be easier for us having all of this stock to ourselves, but what about people trapped in their houses, their cars? How were they expected to survive this? As I pondered to myself, I turned around, suddenly startled by the sound of the male employee speaking for the first time since we'd been here. "Fuck this," was all he said as he entered the code for the large door, which made a loud mechanical whirring as it lifted up. I didn't even have time to process what had happened. I didn't have time to be angry at this man for killing us, and I didn't have time to sprint back to Natalie before I heard her being dragged away by one of those creatures, her hands squeaking across the floor as they tried and failed to grip onto it. The creature was pale, humanoid, but not human. If you've ever seen a hairless chimpanzee, it kind of looked like that. But its limbs were grotesque and distorted, too long for its body, and its face was more human. Its skin was a light grey colour, pulled tightly over its strangely proportioned body. I noticed how it was shrieking, an ungodly sound, but its face was expressionless, its mouth only slightly open as it screamed. I think that was the weirdest part. I thought all of this as I watched this hideous thing drag the girl I love into the consuming darkness of the grocery store. That's when something grabbed me by the leg and pulled it out from under me, causing me to hit my head on the floor, and everything faded to black. "Truth or dare?" Natalie asked me. Truth," I replied. Natalie thought for a moment before Sarah, my mate Marcus's missus, who was sitting next to her, whispered in her ear, causing a massive grin to form on her face. Okay, she giggled as she adjusted her posture and looked me in the eyes, trying to keep a straight face. "Okay, Roman, if you were stuck on an island with all of us, who would you eat first?" I thought for a moment as I looked around the hot tub at all of my close friends. My eyes landed on Max, who is quite overweight, and I couldn't help but smile, causing everyone to laugh, including Max, who splashed water in my face and retorted, "I'd eat all of you before you got the chance." To which Marcus said, "We believe you, bud," and everyone burst out into laughter again. "Okay, Natalie. Truth or dare?" I asked. "Truth," she replied without hesitation. I pretended to ponder my question for a moment. "Would you," I began, as I stood up in the pool, clutching something in my left hand, "make me the happiest man in the world?" I continued as I got down on one knee before her. "And marry me?" I asked, as I held a ring out of the water for her, eliciting a gasp from both of my mates and their partners. Natalie's eyes began to tear up and she asked, "Are you for real?" covering her mouth with her shaking hands. I nodded yes, and she screamed out, "Yes, of course I will," before she jumped on top of me, taking us both underwater as she kissed me. After we all dried off and said our goodbyes, Max came up to me. "Hey man, congratulations. Honestly, I've been waiting for this day since you guys met. Always knew she was the one for you," he said. I looked at him for a moment before replying, "What do you mean, bro? When I first started dating her, you told me that she was no good for me. It's like one of the main reasons I broke up." That's when the words I was saying hit me in the face like a bag of bricks. Max stared at me, his smile not shifting in the slightest. "How long have you and Natalie been together now?" he asked. "Must be around 5 years. About time you popped the question. "Haha," he chuckled, but with every second that passed, my heart started beating more and more rapidly. "This isn't real," I said before squeezing my eyes shut and waking up. A long tendril slid out of my throat as I fell to the ground below and threw up everywhere. I looked up to see a giant, glowing figure, with a dozen other tendrils protruding from its shoulders. The skinny figure stood still, its frame reaching the height of the streetlight next to it. As I tried to make sense of what I was looking at, my eyes made their way down its inhuman body. At the end of each glowing blue tendril was a person, the tendrils entering through each of their mouths, seemingly absorbing something from their bodies as pulsating rings of light emanated from the person and up the tendril. I almost threw up for a second time until I saw Natalie among the dozen bodies attached to the creature. Without hesitation, I reached up to touch her hand, and as I did, I lost consciousness again. "Unzip the tent, babe. Let some light in," I said as I wiped the sleep from my eyes and cracked my stiff back, cursing myself for forgetting an air mattress on a trip we'd been planning for months. I watched and admired my beautiful fiancée as she got up half naked and unzipped our tent. "I hope you slept better than I did," I muttered as I lay back down in my sleeping bag. "Babe, you should have had the air mattress. I would have been happy to trade places," Natalie replied as she opened up her pack and started rummaging through it. "Nah, I'm fine, honestly. I'm not letting my fiancé sleep on the ground," I retorted, my arm covering my eyes, immediately regretting that I got Natalie to let the sun in. "You're such a man," she scoffed jokingly as she tossed me one of the pre-made sandwiches from her pack. I paused for a moment, a split second of déjà vu overtaking my body as I read the label. All of a sudden, I sat up straight in my sleeping bag. "Natalie, this isn't real. None of this is real," I said to her in a panic, causing her to stare at me, concerned. "Are you feeling okay, Roman?" she asked. "Did you get any sleep at all?" "Natalie, the grocery store, the fog, the emergency alert. Don't you remember? None of this is real. We aren't together. We aren't engaged." I spoke quickly, my voice trembling as I tried to get her to snap out of this false reality. I watched as Natalie's face went white and her eyes filled with tears. "What's going on? What is that?" She started to speak but was interrupted by a familiar shriek in the distance. I looked out of the tent to see at least 1,000 of those chimp creatures making their way towards us, seemingly sensing that we weren't being fooled by this illusion any longer. "Natalie, you have to wake up," I yelled. The creatures getting closer. "Close your eyes and wake." I regained consciousness and caught Natalie as the tendril slid out of her throat. Letting her fall, she threw up onto the ground as I held her, before staring back up at the massive glowing creature. That's when we looked around. In the distance, there were more glowing creatures, hundreds of them spread out over the town. "We can see through the fog," Natalie stated, which I honestly hadn't even noticed until then. That's when we heard frantic screaming and looked to our left. One of those chimp creatures was dragging a man out of his car and over to the glowing figure. We watched as one of the tendrils violently shoved its way down the man's throat, and his screaming stopped. Then the other creature just walked off, paying us absolutely no mind. Natalie then looked back up at the bodies attached to the tendrils and gasped as she saw Ari. She went to reach for him, but I grabbed her hand. "Natalie, if you touch him, you'll go back in, and there's no guarantee that you'll ever come back out. It's like it completely wipes your memory every time," I told her. "How do you know?" she asked. "Maybe I'll remember the second time." "You won't, Natalie. I went back in for you, and I'm lucky that I remembered at all," I responded. She stared at me for a moment. "Why did you go back in for me if it's such a big risk?" she questioned. I paused, my eyes welled up. "Because I love you, Nat." An explosion then went off in the distance. I saw it over Natalie's shoulder, then another, each one making its way closer, seemingly each being aimed at those glowing blue creatures. "Run!" I yelled as I grabbed Natalie's hand and sprinted away from Ari and the mass of glowing tentacles. Another explosion went off behind us as a plane roared overhead. The explosion also ignited the service station right next to us, which let off a shockwave that sent us flying off the street. Everything went silent, and I could feel my consciousness once again slipping away. The last thing I saw was Natalie silently screaming in my face, worry overtaking her expression as she held tightly onto my hands. That's when I noticed a piece of fence sticking out of my abdomen. Shit, I thought to myself. As everything faded to black, I saw a group of military-looking men running towards Natalie and me, then nothing. I woke up to the voices of Natalie and Marcus talking to each other. I sat up in the apparent hospital bed I was in and immediately regretted it, holding onto my stomach in pain. Whoa, lay back down, bud. Just relax, Marcus said as he stood up from his chair and slowly laid me back down. Natalie stood up as well, tightly gripping my hand and kissing me on the forehead. What is this? Is it over? I asked, confused about how we were here right now in a hospital. No, it's not over. My higher-ups have decided that we have to start over. Most of the remaining world leaders have come to the same consensus. Marcus paused briefly. You two were lucky to have survived. Most people didn't. Those people are still alive, Marcus, I exclaimed. You can't just bomb the world when those people are still down there. They're in a trance, living in an illusion that those blue things are creating. I can't explain it, but I saw it. Natalie did too. I only got us out because I felt an unbelievable sense of déjà vu and realized it wasn't real. Marcus looked at me, his expression grave. I know, Roman. We're trying to figure out a way to deal with them without causing more harm. But right now, the priority is to keep everyone who's still here safe. You and Natalie are the only ones who've had any interaction with those things and came back, and we need your help to understand what happened down there. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I'll do whatever I can to help. But we can't forget about them. They're still people, trapped in a nightmare. Over the next few months, I recounted this story to more officials in suits than I can count. I told them how I had done twice what nobody else had done once. I went into the dream, as they call it, and I came back both times. Though I did manage to convince them not to bomb the world and kill everyone, it has come at a price. Natalie sobbed as I told her the plan. She cried into my shoulder, just as she did that night many months ago in the grocery store during the emergency alert. I felt her tears soak down to my skin as I told her that I had to go back into the dream and try to wake everyone up. The chance that I would not wake back up was sitting at the forefront of my mind, but I had to be strong for Nat. I just hope that if I do get trapped in a dream, that I'll get to go through with that wedding, I said to her softly, trying to put on a smile. If you don't come back, I'm coming in after you, she replied, tears in her eyes. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to be selfless. But I knew that I would have no complaints if she and I were trapped together again. That selfish part of my brain was still active. On the 14th of November, 2023, an emergency alert was sent to every mobile device across the globe. It warned of a thick fog that would swallow any who were caught in its midst, and the whole world locked themselves inside. You may be wondering why I'm telling you this story. You may be thinking to yourself, I don't remember the day the fog rolled in and the emergency alert sounded. That is why I'm telling you this story. This is not real. You need to wake up. The third tale has left its mark, a chilling imprint on our minds. Now, steel your nerves as we approach the fourth story. This next tale is not for the faint of heart, for it dwells in the darkest corners of the Cryptic Chronicles. Let the curtain rise on a narrative that will test the boundaries of your imagination. Cryptic Chronicles presents Fear Not the Shadows. My name was Private Charles Lee Locod. I enlisted back in '67 for the US Army. I traded my fiancée for a rifle, my home for a tent, and 3 years of my life for someone else. Some men kill to live. I was one of those men. Though I don't think I ever actually killed anyone, at least I did my best not to. Then there are men who live to kill, men like Sergeant Stevens. He was a backwoods Carolina man who took pleasure in each gruesome act. The last I saw him was a few days ago when he waved me goodbye as I got on the bird. Good riddance. After a year of crawling through the jungle dirt, I finally earned my way home. I was one of the lucky ones, unlike so many others that fought in that country but didn't make it back. I was just so glad to finally be rid of Stevens. That man was a psychotic, gun-ho, high-speed death machine. He once told me when I first met him, "Son, my count is 23, and all I felt was the recoil of my rifle." Like I said, psychotic. To his credit, after 2 years of killing, it finally got to him. 3 weeks before I left Nam, he told me he wished he could be more like me. He wished he could undo the things he had done. He wished he could go back in time and stop himself. I told him, "Look, Stevens, I know you hate yourself, but there's still time to change the road you're on." If I remember correctly, I told him that right before he ordered me to storm that tunnel. All I really remember from that is a loud bang and watching Stevens pull me out with tears in his eyes. After I got myself off base, I made my way to the bus depot in Tenino. I was supposed to wait for a ride to take me back home to New York. Why didn't I just ride a bird to New York? Don't ask me, ask Uncle Sam. So I get to the depot and find out my ride is running a few hours late. I hadn't a bite to eat since I left country, so I made myself across the street to a small diner. I ordered a big steak with a side of eggs. The waitress took my order and gave me a strange look. "Would you like a different chair?" she asked. I must have been fidgeting a little. It isn't a great feeling when sharp war mementos are moving around in your pockets. After I finished my steak and eggs, the waitress comes back over with a bottle of Coke. She says, "I want you to have this for your service." My mind flashed back to Nam when we came across this piss-poor village along the Perfume River. A little girl runs up to me, smiles, and hands me a bottle of Coke. She says something in her native tongue and walks off. I pull off the cap and am about to take a swig when Stevens slaps the bottle out of my hand. It then falls and breaks against the rocky road. "Why'd you do that?" I ask. Stevens replies, "Buddy, I've seen this trick before. There's glass shards in that Coke. One drink of that and you'll be bleeding inside." He then lifts his rifle, aims it at the girl, flips the safety switch, and fires. What happens after is hard to recall. Lieutenant Higgins screams, "Stevens, what the hell is wrong with you?" The young girl's mother rushes to her bloody corpse, with tears streaking down her weathered face. Stevens then raises his rifle again and fires at the women. I snapped back to reality, and the waitress was looking at me with a puzzled expression. "No thanks, ma'am," I said in urgency. She then motions me just to take the bottle. "Damn it, I don't want your fucking Coke," I screamed. She then walked away, still looking confused and a little sad. After that little incident, I paid for my meal, leaving a generous tip for the lady I insulted, and headed back to the bus depot. Within a half hour, my bus arrived and I stepped aboard. The grey-haired driver stood upon seeing my olive-drab fatigues and greeted me with a firm handshake. "Welcome home, son," he said in a thick southern accent. I took my seat at the end of the chrome charter, tossed my duffel bag in the seat in front of me, and reclined with my legs across the cushion, hoping to catch some sleep. To my surprise, as soon as I laid down, the bus took off. I drew a deep, relaxing breath and quickly drifted off to sleep. I had a nightmare. I was back home. Stevens and I are pulling night guard in the tower overlooking the gate. He pulls out a cigarette and lights it. "That's a nice lighter. Mind if I look?" I ask. He hands it to me and I study it with my flashlight. It was a little hard to read the engraving with the red lens filter, but I was able to make out the phrase, "I fear not the shadows as I venture through the valley of death, for I am the most evil thing there." I laugh a little and ask, "Fear not the shadows? What's that supposed to mean?" Stevens lets out a big plume of smoke and asks, "You read the Bible, boy?" I shake my head. You see, there's a verse in Psalms that tells believers not to worry as they fear for their lives because God is with them. I changed the words a little to say, "Yes, don't fear the shadows. Instead, you should fear me, for I am the most evil," if that makes sense. I look at him quizzically. "Do you really believe that?" He lets out another cloud of smoke and responds, "I like to say it to myself in a firefight. Gives me courage." From down below the tower, I hear Higgins yell in a hushed tone, "Stevens, shut up, you crazy idiot. Do you want the entire NVA coming down on us?" Stevens shrugs his shoulders and readjusts himself on the M60 as if to act like he's doing something. "Prick," he murmurs. "What did you say, Stevens?" Higgins yells back. "The jungle is thick," Stevens replies. Higgins, now more upset than he was before, yells, "Stevens, I saw what you did to that girl. Don't think you won't end up in Leavenworth when I tell the colonel about it." Stevens clenches his teeth and mumbles, "Don't think I won't kill you, Higgins." After a half hour of quiet boredom, there was an eruption of gunfire in the tree line. Stevens lays down on them with the continuous bursts of fire. I hunker down and call out targets, "Hit 'em at 2, half dozen at 11. Stevens yells, "Reload, reload." I grab a fresh belt and slam it in the receiver. Off in the distance, I hear a rumble and some squeaking. One of our tanks is rushing to the gate at full speed. From the tree line, 2 long streaks of black smoke stream its way. They hit the tank and explode into a ball of flames. "Hot tube! Hot tube!" Stevens yells to me. I put on my asbestos glove and change his 60 barrel. "Link them all together," he yells. I do so with the belted rounds as fast as I can in cover and yell, "What's happening?" I then hear what sounds like thousands of people screaming in unison. I look up and see what looks like an entire battalion of Vietnamese running right for us, guns blazing. Stevens patiently waits for me to finish the task and mumbles, "Fear not the shadows," as he then squeezes the trigger and doesn't let up. I grab my rifle and start firing a few well-aimed shots. Spent brass soon lined the floor of the tower. Calling out targets became pointless. They were coming from all directions. I change my magazine and I see Stevens' barrel glowing red-hot as his last rounds are shot off. He then grabs me and throws me over the ledge of the tower. He jumps over and lands on top of me. Before I can understand what's happening, he picks me up and we're running away. I take a glance behind me and the attacking Vietnamese are bum-rushing the gate. Stevens and I then run into the jungle where we see Higgins running a few yards ahead of us. Stevens then aims his rifle and fires. I woke up screaming at the top of my lungs and it startled the old bus driver. He swerved a little. "Dear Lord, son, what's wrong?" he asked. I took a few deep breaths and wiped the cold sweat from my brow. "Just had a nightmare," I responded. The driver gently parked the bus, walked back to me and asked, "Is there anything I can do, son?" I shook my head. "No, unless you can make me forget all the war crimes." "You did something you shouldn't have?" "No, there was a guy in my platoon. He was a murderer. Why do his crimes upset you?" "I could have saved a few innocent lives had I just killed him." He nodded his head. "I understand why you feel guilty, but I'm going to tell you that you did the right thing by not doing it." I wiped away a fresh batch of sweat on my head. Why was it the right thing? He gently placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, I've seen the ugly face of war once, and I can tell you that some people just go crazy when faced with death. They lose all sense of humanity and devalue their brothers and sisters of God to mere animals. Only later does it catch up to haunt them. You did the right thing. It's best to give people a chance to face their mistakes and change the wicked road they're on. That guy was a contained psychopath. War just drew him out. I just hope the people I've failed don't come back to haunt me." "Did he ever show any remorse?" "Yeah, he broke down one day and told me he wished he hadn't done the things he had done. He told me he wished he could be more like me." "If I were you, I would take that as a badge of honor. You went to war, saw the faces of evil, and you didn't come home a murderer. You came home a man that evil envies." I unsuccessfully tried to hold back the tears from his words. I started crying pathetically. The driver gave me a pat on the shoulder and walked away. He resumed traveling down the heavily wooded road through the Washington darkness. As usual in the Pacific Northwest, it started to rain. I stared out the window as the thick raindrops rolled down the window. I flinched when I saw what looked like a person walking on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just some drifter. Then I saw it again, and again, and again. Something wasn't right. Why would there be so many people walking down a quiet road in the middle of the night? In the rain, the bus came up to a lighted intersection and stopped. I gasped when I saw someone running towards the bus door. It looked like a black silhouette, just like a shadow. I was about to yell to the driver, but he started moving again, and the shadow slammed into the side of the bus with a thud. I desperately hoped I could have drawn this up to me, just going insane and seeing things, but I know I saw the driver flinch a little when the shadow man made impact. I tucked my head below the window and closed my eyes, which was my biggest mistake. I fell asleep again. It's the morning after the attack. We were tasked to go out and take account of casualties. After the gun bunnies on the hill filled the sky with beehive rounds, that is, artillery shells that shoot tiny arrows everywhere, the horde was either killed or repelled. It was a slaughter, to say the least. There was friend and foe alike, literally nailed to the trees from the tiny flesh-it arrows. I kept a rag to my mouth to filter out the scent of smoldering burnt flesh from when the flyboys came over and naped the entire area. After some time of collecting ash-covered dog tags, I find Stevens knelt over the body of Higgins. To my horror, Higgins was still alive and conscious. Stevens has him pinned to the ground with the muzzle of his rifle prying open Higgins's mouth. Stevens then stabs his knife into his mouth. He then picks up a large rock and swings it at the knife handle. I can still hear the crack and Higgins scream as each of his teeth were being pried out. "Dear God, Stevens, what the hell are you doing?" Stevens looks at me after popping another tooth loose. "Hey pal, gold is worth money, and this guy had a lot of fucking cavities." I shout in anger, does he really have to suffer through that? Stevens rolls his eyes and grabs the pistol at Higgins's waist. He points it at his forehead and fires. A spray of blood covers them both. "That's not what I meant. I ought to kill you right now, you disgusting pig." Stevens shakes his head and goes back to popping out Higgins's teeth. He stops for a moment as if he suddenly feels disgusted with himself. He picks up the pistol again and throws it at my feet. "Then do it," he commands. I take hold of the pistol and aim at his head. I start to squeeze the trigger and stop. He's not even looking at me. It's at this point I realize he doesn't care. Either he feels remorse and wishes to die, which I doubt, or he truly believes in his fear, not the shadow's nonsense. I then see Stevens shimmy himself away from Higgins's chest. I think the horror is over, that is, until he stabs his knife into Higgins's belly. "What the hell?" I scream. Stevens looks at me and says he swallowed a couple. He then rips the blade across the chest and the corpse splits open. Upon awaking, my screaming made the driver swerve violently. The wheels slip on the wet road and the vehicle goes head-on into the road ditch. The bus slammed into a tree. I was sent into the air and crashed into the seat in front of me. I lied there on the floor for a moment, feeling ashamed for what I caused. I heard the driver call out, "Are you okay?" I sat up and replied, "Yeah, I've been hit harder." The driver nods to me and attempts to back up. The tires turned rapidly and ejected mud into the wheel wells. The driver stopped trying to back up and exited the bus. I followed him with my eyes as he examined the situation with a flashlight. I saw a shadow casted before the light. I thought nothing of it at first, and then I realized shadows are casted away from light, not behind it. I started pounding my fist against the window, trying to get his attention. He acknowledged me and shook his head. The shadow remained as he walked back towards the door. I looked closely and the shadow is still there in the darkness, staring at me. I hadn't noticed, but the driver came up to me as I stared in fear out the window. "I need to get to the next town and call a wrecker. We aren't getting out of this ditch without one. Damn near sunk 2 feet into the mud. I quickly turned my head to him in surprise. No, please don't leave me here with those things. What do you mean things? Those shadow people. Didn't you see them? The driver cocked his head and crunched his face in confusion. I think when we get to New York, you should talk to a shrink. There aren't anything out there but the rain. Well, please let me go with you. No, it goes against company protocol. You have to stay here. Please. No, stay here and get some sleep. I don't want you screaming when we get moving again. The driver turned his back to me and walked away. I begged him to stay as he exited the bus, though it did not stop him. He did come back after he stopped suddenly in the darkness. I was hoping he'd changed his mind, but he flipped the ignition switch and removed the keys. The bus went dark. As he turned to leave, he said, "Son, I really don't want to leave you here in your mental state, but I have to. The only advice I can give you is this: fear not the shadows." I lied down on the seat again, shaking in fear. I managed to eventually convince myself that I was going crazy. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. I've been to war, of course that's going to mess up my head. That shadow didn't attack the driver, so that means it's all in my head. I said it out loud, "Fear not the shadows." I gained some courage from the words. The whole situation soon seemed like I was just a crazy man stuck in the woods. I resumed staring out the window at the falling raindrops. The rain does something to a man. To some, it makes them depressed. Others like to listen and watch it as a form of entertainment. For me, it puts pressure on my bladder. I really didn't want to go outside, still slightly fearing what I had convinced myself were hallucinations. But a man has to do what he has to do. I cautiously exited the vehicle and found a nearby tree. As I relieved myself, I heard a noise, like a boot sinking into silt. I told myself, "It's all in your head. You're just going crazy. Fear not the shadows." I looked around as I zipped up my trousers. Off in the distance, I saw something moving in the trees. It looks like a dark group of people. I heard a twig snap. I quickly turned to my right and saw a shadow figure running to me. I abandoned all logic and ran back to the bus, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I ran to the back seat and crawled underneath it. The sound of the rain hitting the steel rooftop drowned out any sound of footsteps I heard outside. This was the worst part, not knowing if they were still coming for me or if they had gone away. I whispered to myself, "You're just hallucinating. Fear not the shadows." I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I would have rather dreamed about the war than deal with this reality I was living in. There was a scratching along the side of the chrome bus. It came and went sporadically for an hour. Then it became a constant, nails on chalkboard, like screech that made chills run down my spine. Then there were the sound of thumps, like hands or tree branches pounding against the metal walls. I buried my knees deep to my chest when the bus started shaking violently from side to side. I thought I'd had to have been dreaming. I tried pinching my wrist desperately in hopes of awaking. I squeezed harder and harder until at last I realized I wasn't dreaming, as blood started to trickle on my fingers. There were deafening screams, like the ones I heard the night Stevens and I were up in the guard tower. I whispered it to myself over and over again, "Fear not the shadows, fear not the shadows, fear not the shadows." I began to gather courage from the words, but that courage soon dissipated when I heard the sound of breaking glass and the sound of scampering feet rushing into the vehicle. When I saw the feet coming down the aisle, I closed my eyes and started screaming, "Fear not the shadows, fear not the shadows, fear not the shadows." I opened my eyes and the feet were gone, and I took a deep breath. My little chant seemed to help. Then there was this sucking noise, like walking across a hard wood floor with wet feet. 2 small, bare, and bloodied feet, slowing, crept towards me. My heart raced faster with each sticking, staining, limping step. I thought my chest was about to explode when the feet were only inches from my face. I whispered, "Fear not the shadow." Once more, but the phantasm refused to leave my sight. It fell to its knees and reached a fisted hand beneath the seat. I pushed my back as far as I could against the wall. The blood-soaked fist crept right in front of my face and suddenly stopped. The little fingers opened into a palm. The digits flapped back and forth, beckoning me to take grasp of it. I whimpered out a no. Then I heard a familiar voice say, "If you fear not the shadows, take her hand." I did so hesitantly. The little hand gently tugs on my arm, and I shuffled myself out from the seat. I stood and looked at the hand I was holding. It was the girl Stevens murdered. Blood was dripping from the wound in her forehead and down her entire body. She looked at me with sympathy and pulled me forward up the aisle. When she turned her head away, I looked up and saw the multitude of feet from earlier standing in the seats. They were always there. My chant did nothing. There were mostly faces of bloody Vietnamese soldiers staring back at me. Some of them stoic, some sad, a few bowed their heads in prayer, and a few had looks of anger and utter hate. Their eyes followed me as the little girl and I walked to the front. I gasped when I saw the face of Higgins looking at me slack-jawed, teeth missing. Then to my utmost horror, I saw me. I was standing at the front of the bus, and most of my face was missing from what looked to be a trauma wound caused by an explosion. The man that looked like me stuck out his arm and pointed to the driver's seat, motioning me to sit there. I took a breath and asked, "Who are you and these people?" The man mimicked my movement by taking a deep breath and said, "These people are fathers, sons, brothers, mothers, daughters, and sisters. All any of them wanted in their final moments was to be home with their families. You are the one that cheated them out of it." "You got the wrong guy. I never killed anyone." "Do you recognize any of them?" After a look around the bus, I looked back at myself and answered, "Yes, a couple. Like this girl, the older lady is her mother, and that man without any teeth is Higgins." The man that looked like me buttoned his lips and asked, "What happened to them?" "They were all killed by Stevens." "Where is Stevens now?" "He's still in Nam." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, he's the last person I saw before getting on the bird." The man again pointed to the driver's seat and commanded me to sit. I shakily sat down with my quaking hands at my lap. The man reached up in front of me and tilted the driver's mirror down. He then asked, "What do you see?" "I can't see anything." "Pull out your lighter." "I don't have a lighter, I don't smoke." "Yes, you do have a lighter. Check your right front pocket." I grabbed at my chest and felt something hard in my chest pocket. I reached in, pulled it out, and paused. "What are you waiting for? Strike it," he said, now yelling. I let out a slight sob and said, "No, I don't want to." He screamed, "Fear not the shadows and do it." The lighter flipped open with a metallic click. I rolled the flint, and the vehicle was slightly filled with light. I gasped when I saw what was being reflected back at me. It was Stevens. What? How in the hell can this be? Locod put a hand on my shoulder and said, "A month ago, you told me you envied me. You wished you could change the road you were on and become a better person." "No, I don't believe it." "You tricked yourself into believing you were someone else." "No, I am Private Charles Lee Locod." Private Charles Lee Locod was killed when he was ordered by his sergeant to clear a tunnel. He stepped on a tripwire, and the grenade it was connected to blew off most of his face. "I am Charles Lee Locod. I am from New York, and I am going home to my fiancée." He violently grasped me by the shoulders and asked in a forced calm, "What does she look like?" I was silent. For the life of me, I couldn't remember what my beloved looked like. After what seemed like an eternity of silence, he spoke, "You don't know, do you?" I screamed, "No, I just can't remember. It's been a year since I saw her last." A fist came crashing into my face. "You can't remember because you don't have anything to remember," he yelled with his bloody, mangled face close to mine. I then felt someone reach into my pocket. I looked and saw the little girl pull something out. She opened her palm to reveal a loose set of golden teeth. "Those aren't mine," I screeched. "You're right, Stevens, those aren't yours. You pried them out of Higgins's mouth. I don't understand any of this. What are all of you trying to do? The man released his grip from me and took a step back. You need to remember what you did. You can go through life living the lie that you're the innocent Charles Lee Lowcod, or you can face who you are and change the road you're on. I am Lowcod, God damn it! I'm just going insane. He looked me square in the eyes and said, "Read what's engraved in your lighter." I shook my head. I don't want to. Read it now. No, I won't. Face the truth, Stevens. A tear ran down my cheek as a dozen hands were placed on my shoulders and back. The little girl reached her arms around my waist and hugged me. In that moment, I finally realized it was me who killed Higgins. It was me who murdered the girl. It was me who sent Lowcod to his death. My name may still be Stevens, but there are two different Stevens out there. One was murderer that was left in the hell of war, and the other is a man that left him behind. I spoke softly aloud. I fear not the shadows as I venture through the valley of death, for I am the most evil thing there. I didn't even have to read it to know that. Transitioning from the penultimate to the final story, we cross the boundary into a realm where the unimaginable becomes reality. The final entry in our anthology awaits, a tale that stands at the pinnacle of terror. Gather your courage, for we are about to embark on the concluding chapter of this night's Cryptic Chronicles. Embrace the darkness one last time as we unveil a story that will haunt your dreams. Cryptic Chronicles presents The Midnight Lockup. February 10th, 2012. This story began about 5 days ago, but I've only now just got round to writing it down. I'll take my time to make sure I share everything with you, and the fact that this whole ordeal hasn't once left my mind makes me feel certain that I won't miss any details. It's going to be a very long story, maybe too long for some people, but I just need some sort of explanation to keep me from feeling insane. I'm hoping that if I write it all down, maybe I or someone else can make some sense of it, as little as there may be. Well, I suppose this story actually began 48 years ago, and the only reason I know anything about it is because of my granddad. From the 60s up until the late 80s, my granddad used to work on the ships as a deckhand. He worked on many different ships under the wing of many different captains, and so the sea being the exciting place that it is, left him with hundreds of stories to tell. When I was a young boy, I would continuously ask him to tell me these stories, even the ones I had already heard. Some of them were gruesome, some of them were funny, there was even a few sad tales, but only one of them was genuinely scary. I remember almost all of the stories that he'd share with me, but I think it's obvious which one stood out the most. My granddad was 23 in 1964, and he'd just been drafted onto a ship that was delivering cargo to countries in South America. It was no different than the other two ships that he had previously worked on, except maybe it was a bit bigger. I won't give the real name of the ship, but for future reference, we will call it the CWS. My granddad began the story by explaining to me just how strange the captain of the ship was. How he was a lot happier and friendlier than other captains he'd worked with, but only during the day. Once the clock was nearing midnight, he would become paranoid, angry and agitated, the complete opposite to his day-walking self. He'd scurry around the ship, briskly rushing everyone into their private quarters, ignoring any questions they would ask. Then, just before locking each door, he would stare into their eyes and plead with them not to try and leave their rooms until the morning came. Almost everybody listened. At this point, I should mention that the captain had an annoying habit that the crew had to put up with. He would sing, "Do you want to know a secret?" by the Beatles, all day, every day without fail, and that's the only song he would sing. Even in the night, they could hear him humming the tune from behind his locked cabin door. After being on the ship for a week or so, all of the sailors were beginning to grow more and more annoyed at the actions of the captain. His seemingly split personality, his constant singing, all of his annoying traits. But most of all, It was the way he locked everyone in their rooms of a night, almost as if they were children not to be trusted. That was until one night changed the way they were all feeling. It was the usual time of night when the captain would dart about, clumsily rushing everyone into their cages. But one of the deckhands, JP, had a plan. Earlier on in the day, he had altered the lock on his door so that he could open it from inside of his room with ease by using a magnet. My granddad was told that JP had the intention of getting everyone else out of their rooms for a party on the lower deck. So naturally, they were all excited and ready for a night of drinking. With his ear up against the door, my granddad listened intently to what was going on outside of his room. Over the captain's monotonous pop song droning, he heard a lock snap open and the hushed creak of a lone metal door. Just as footsteps began echoing throughout the empty halls, the humming stopped. As my granddad winced at the door in annoyance, he heard vicious thuds and screams of pain, howling and scratching at the floor while JP begged for help. His cries were growing fainter, almost as if he was being dragged through the ship, lower and lower into the steel abyss. As the fading remainder of his pain erupted from the halls, my granddad stepped back in horror as all movement outside the door had stopped, and the damp corridor echoed silence. The next morning, as the doors snapped open, nobody wanted to step outside, but they had to. After mustering enough courage, my granddad finally stepped out into the hall as the most putrid odor he'd ever smelt surrounded him. Holding his nose and gagging, he looked around to see a small puddle of what looked like blood and oil mixed together. The only assumption that the crew could come up with was that the inmate had simply gotten out and sustained an injury. Curious as to what the captain would say, they all got ready for a day of work. They sprinted through the foul-smelling hall and onto the upper deck. Once they arrived upstairs, they noticed the captain was already up there, singing his usual song as if he didn't have a care in the world. In an uproar, the crew questioned him on what had gone on the night before, but they didn't get an answer. He just sang. None of them ever saw JP again, and the next 3 months were the longest of their lives. The rest of the time on the ship was dictated by the captain. The crew became quiet and despondent as the Beatles rained over their eardrums. The work they once loved had become dreary, and the ship felt like a prison. The crew would never question the captain, and none of them would dare leave their room after hours. Until one night, a couple of months after what happened to JP, my granddad finally had enough, and curiosity got the better of him. He took on the same plan that JP had, except he was going to be more careful. As my granddad said, if it was the captain's fault, I needed to know for the sake of us all. It was 2:03 a.m., and my granddad finally mustered up the courage to approach the door. He took the magnet and slowly began to ease the lock to the left. A second or so before the lock snapped open, the humming stopped, and a huge bang echoed violently through the darkness. He forced the door forward with all of his strength, hoping that whatever was out there wouldn't get in. But nothing tried to. He slowly inched the door towards him, enough so that he could peer into the dimly lit hallway in front of him. As he did so, he heard the quiet pitter-patter of something stealthily bounding towards him within the darkness far ahead. The smell came back and filled his room. After taking a moment to gag into his sleeve, as if out of nowhere, a heavy panting made itself known from just outside the door. After momentarily freezing, he slowly began to react to the situation he was in. I don't know why he did it, or how he got the courage, but he gazed back out into the hallway. My mind has never forgotten the look of sincerity and terror on his face as he described to me in detail what he witnessed in that corridor. In my granddad's words, it was a four-legged creature that had thick razor-sharp hair that seemed to be coated in oil or tar. I don't know if it was the smell or the fear I was feeling, but it made my vision quite hazy for a moment and gave me the worst pain in the back of my head. It was on eye level with me when it was on all fours, so I can't imagine how big it would have been if it stood upright. It had black hooves on its hind legs, but it had what looked like black clenched human fists on its front legs. Its face was the worst. Where its mouth was were just 3 holes in the left, right, and center of the usual place a smile would occupy. It looked as if they had been ripped to create something resembling a grimace, then joined together by 2 large slices in between. Its eyes were shaped like that of a cat's, but with a white sclera, all black pupils, much larger and turned on their sides. It stared right at me, eyes widened, opened its mouth to reveal hundreds of razor-sharp, dark yellow teeth, and let out a deep human shriek. That's when I slammed the door, locked it, and passed out for the night. After that incident, my granddad was never curious again. He still had another 2 weeks, and then he knew he was off the CWS for good. For the remainder of the time there, he stayed silent like the rest of the crew. Every now and then, he'd go to tell someone what he witnessed, but he decided it would be best to just stay quiet. Leaving day couldn't come fast enough, and as he hopped of the ship with rest of the crew, he looked back at the CWS for one last time as the captain waved off into the distance, singing his song while his new crew got to know the ship. A year or so later, my granddad heard from a friend that the ship had been found off the coast of Argentina, completely abandoned. After that, he never heard anything of it again. My granddad is 71 now, long retired and happy as ever. After I picked the local newspaper up last week, his memory was jolted, and what must have felt like a dream or a nightmare made his heart drop. The CWS was docked at an old harbour, not 3 hours away from where he lives, and is being used as an attraction to bring a bit more money to the area. I was sure that my granddad would see it as a tour of his worst fears. But nonetheless, he looked at me, almost instantly, and said, "We have to go." So we did, at June 10th, 2012. It was only a few of days after noticing the opportunity in the newspaper that me and my granddad finally decided to go and experience the CWS in all of her former horror. We gathered everything that we would need for the trip and set off in the early hours of the morning. By the time we'd arrived at the harbour, it was nearing midday, so we headed towards a nearby cafe for some lunch. I'd like to think that we were both hungry enough to merit a meal, but I had the feeling that we were just stalling for time. We took a table with a window view so that we could admire the ship for as long as we wanted to before going in. My granddad seemed so distant as he looked up at that rusted metal monolith, his eyes open wide as if trying to pierce the steel. In his fixation, he barely spoke a word for a good 20 minutes or so. After the food we had hardly touched went cold, he finally loosened his gaze and faced me. "I'm ready to go in," he said. Heading towards the floating structure, I began to realize how nervous I seemed to be, sweating wildly as huge metal butterflies crippled my stomach. Yet, I had no reason to feel this way. I suppose the story had a bigger impact on me than I had thought. We trudged through the puddles and black land surrounding the harbour until we finally hit the pier. Looking over at my granddad, he seemed to be a lot more relaxed than I had anticipated. We climbed the stairs up towards a huge metal door on the right side of the ship and approached the ticket barrier. My granddad, being over 60, meant that he only had to pay £2, whereas I had to pay full admission. Not a bad price for brain-deteriorating nightmares. Then, with a couple of deep breaths and what seemed like infinite hesitation, we stepped onto the CWS. Once inside, we slowly made our way to the top of the ship to look around. It only took me a moment to realize how safe and well-kept it looked after all these years. So I began to relax as the images of a dark, damp ghost ship subsided in my mind. We started off upstairs and had the intention of making our way down to the orlop deck. But after a second look at the small leaflet that had been handed to us, I noticed that we could only experience half of the ship. The bottom 3 decks had seemingly disappeared off the map, leaving us with only a part of the experience, although I'm sure my granddad didn't mind after all that had happened. After revisiting a few of the old stories he'd told me as a child, we finally decided to leave the quarterdeck and head on down the stairs to the next floor. Up until now, we had only seen 3 other people wandering about on the ship with us. We just assumed that there were others on the lower decks. But once we went downstairs, there were no other people in sight. This deck seemed dirtier, and it didn't really have anything to offer. It was mostly just empty space and a few metal doors that were sealed shut. Even my granddad didn't have much to say about this deck. "There would usually be a few cargo crates on this deck," he muttered, but that was it. We reached the final deck that we were able to explore and made our way down the narrow corridors ahead. Looking left and right, we could see nothing. Every door seemed to be locked, and other corridors were completely blocked off. After speeding through a metal maze for nearly 5 minutes without seeing anything worth mentioning, and already having explored the other 2 empty decks, I couldn't help but feel cheated out of an interesting experience. And my own money. As we neared the end of the deck, we finally reached a huge door that was actually open. But just as I turned around to express my disbelief, I realized that my granddad had not been following me. I stopped in my tracks at the edge of the door and peered down the path I had walked. I shouted for a full minute, but he was nowhere around. I know I should have backtracked to find him, but I had finally found an open door and somewhere that was worth exploring. I assumed that he would find me shortly. After all, with all of the locked doors and blocked corridors, there was only one way forward. I stepped inside and scanned the room. It was a huge area, with at least 20 tables in and an old, dirty kitchen. It was clear what this place was, but I couldn't help wondering why everything was so neglected on this part of the ship, when the quarterdeck was so spotless. Maybe this room was meant to be locked too. I made my way into the kitchen and began to look around. Everything was old, damp, and rotting. There were still plates on tables and coats on the backs of chairs. It was clear that I wasn't supposed to be in here. As you can expect, I was getting a bad feeling from the place, so I decided to leave. Just as I turned to exit, I noticed a door in the far corner of the room. I didn't want to approach the door, but I felt like I needed to. After all, it was probably locked anyway. Dodging tables and various stains on the floor, I slowly made my way over to the corner of the room. I placed my hand on the cold steel of the huge metal handle and mustered enough strength to pull it down. Then it opened. A huge wall of damp air hit me as I recoiled and coughed into my hands. I examined the darkness to try and make out where I was, but I couldn't hear or see a thing. At this point, I wasn't sure what to expect. The door was unlocked, so for all I knew, it was part of the tour. I felt my way along the side of the cold wall to try and find a light switch. Then, as the lights flickered on, I realized where I was. I was stood at the top of a set of stairs and staring down into puddles of dim light at the foot of the steps. Now I knew why the other decks were unavailable for viewing. I took the 6 steps down into the yellow light, so I could closer look around at what was hidden on the deck. The dim light showed a miserable labyrinth of cold metal and dripping walls, a rusted case of neglected memories. Once at the bottom of the stairs, I couldn't help but think of the story and the way my granddad described the setting. This all looked very familiar to the images in my mind. I navigated my way further into the dark. The murky lighting, now only as strong as a candle, as countless drips echoed throughout the domain, I couldn't help but remember the silence from not 2 minutes ago. I must have wandered further in than I thought, I mumbled to myself. That's when I reached a small staircase leading further down into a red glow. I made my way down the stairs and noticed 8 doors, almost in a circle surrounding me. One of the doors was bigger than all the others and centered at the back of the room. Above it, lit up with a small red bulb, was the word Captain. It was then that I knew where I was. It was almost exactly how I had pictured it. But the fear I felt when imagining it was nothing like when I was there. It was always in the back of my mind that there was a chance my granddad had just created the story for me when I was a child, or maybe even exaggerated a real experience he had. But now I knew that he'd had told me the truth all along. With my heart growing cold and pounding faster, I turned to head back upstairs, but I froze. That's when I heard the singing. "Listen, do you want to know a secret? Do you promise not to tell? Closer, let me whisper in your ear." I felt sick to my stomach as the song echoed through halls growing louder. It was impossible that this was happening to me. I headed straight back up the stairs. I've never ran so fast in my entire life. Just as I got to the top, I heard a huge bang from below, followed by a hideous, deep shriek. I carried on sprinting towards the dim light at the bottom of the staircase that I had so stupidly followed before. My head began pulsating with the worst pain I had ever felt, and I started to grow dizzy. As I ran, I could hear a quiet pouncing following me from behind, hitting the puddles and panting heavily. The worst smell hit me as I was almost back upstairs. I knew it was close, and I knew it was real. I reached the top and slammed the door behind me, locking it straight away. As I stumbled into a nearby table, a ferocious thud hit the metal. Just the once. I picked myself up straight away and headed back down the corridors. I finally found my way out of the maze and back onto the quarterdeck, where my granddad was stood. I was shaking as I tried to get my words out. He took me off the ship and back into the car. I never told him what happened. And at the time, I wasn't sure if he thought I was joking or if I really did experience something. I just wish he was there with me to have kept me from going through that door. I spoke to him yesterday and told him everything. Thankfully, he believed me and had me talk him through every little detail. Going over it so many times has helped me a lot more than I thought it would. I never witnessed what was following me through those halls, so I can't give you details of its appearance. But I know it was definitely the same creature that terrified my granddad all those years ago. After a lot of research and countless phone calls to some of my granddad's old sailor friends, we finally found out some information. Apparently, the ship is docked at that specific harbour because the captain was born in the nearby town. In an 8-year run of the ship, he was the first and only captain that the CWS had. So out of respect, they placed the ship there. Nobody can explain to us how it went missing for 48 years and then suddenly appeared where it is now. It's been 5 days since I was on the ship, and I'm feeling a lot better than I initially did. That's why me and my granddad are going back to the ship. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we feel like we have to. Within the next couple of hours, we will be heading back to the CWS. But we are going to the nearby town first to talk to the locals and find out some more information. November 10th, 2012. It's been about 3 days since we got back from our trip to the CWS and the nearby town that we'd heard so much about. It took me a while to even process the fact that we were going back after what happened to me last time. But my granddad seemed keen, and I suppose that you could say I needed some kind of closure. After all the research, hassling and phone calls we'd made, it seemed like we had no choice but to investigate further. If only I could have known the story we were digging deeper into. I would never have dreamt of getting involved. We set off on Monday morning and decided to head straight on to the town, having no stops whatsoever. It was just approaching midday as we drove silently past the CWS. Remembering what happened to me and knowing that we would be back on the ship soon enough gave me the worst feeling in my stomach. The supposed nearby town was actually a fair distance away from where the CWS was docked. It took us almost another half an hour to witness the welcome sign, but we eventually made it. Nearing the town, passing by the mounds of unkempt greenery and land, we expected it to be an old, desolate fishing town with few people inhabiting it. After all, the entire area we had passed up to now was horribly mistreated. Yet, we noticed as we were nearing the area that what we could see up ahead was beautiful. We kept on driving until we reached a small bridge that took us over into the town. And what a town it was! It was very well kept and looked as if it got a good bit of business for a seemingly hidden little village. There were rows of shops either side of us, a small B&B, another harbour that held minuscule fishing boats, and a few rows of houses further back that were hidden behind the shops. I remember looking over at the fishing boats for a moment, then turning my head to the north to look at the CWS. I felt so small. After we had gotten over the shock of how nice the town was, we decided it would be wise to start looking for information immediately. We wandered the streets, trying to find somewhere that we thought might be useful, and that's when I spotted it. In the midst of all the bustling shops, there was a small, dark, sweet shop in the far corner of my vision that caught my eye. I figured that maybe the person who owned the shop would know a thing or two about the CWS or the captain, so we headed on over. At first glance, anybody would assume that the shop was shut. Nobody was going in, and it looked as if it hadn't been in business for years. But when we approached the door, the sign told us otherwise. As we went inside, we were greeted by a friendly old man who looked too frail to even be out of his own house. He gawked at us awkwardly, shaking with every breath, until my granddad finally decided to ask him a few questions. The first of which was, "Do you know anything about the ship docked a few miles away? The CWS?" A look of anger filled his face. "No," he replied. My granddad asked him another question, and he gave us the same answer again. He must have said no at least 5 times, each time getting quicker and louder, until my granddad couldn't even finish his sentence. We knew that he knew something, so we kept pushing the questions until he took a deep breath and wrote something down. "Take this and go see his sister. She might talk to you. Now leave." He then hurried us out of the door and back onto the street. After a quick bite to eat, we set off to find the house written down so that we could talk to the captain's sister. We arrived at a huge house on the other side of the village and knocked on the thick wooden door. A thin, old woman opened up with a smile on her face. She said hello and happily invited us inside. It seemed like she hadn't had company in a long time. Her eyes were glazed over, almost as if she wasn't completely with us. Once inside, I cut to the chase. There was no need in making small talk. She was either going to talk to us or she wasn't. I immediately asked, "Would you be willing to talk to us about your brother?" And to my surprise, she told me she'd love to. I let my granddad ask her the questions as he knew more about the captain, the ship, the history. He had all of the knowledge. So I sat back and wrote down everything that was said in the interview. SA is my granddad and EB is the captain's sister. SA, so the captain of the CWS, he was your brother. EB, his name was DB, and yes, he was a wonderful brother too. Very caring when we were children. Of course, I didn't get to see enough of him when we got older. Being the captain of a ship is very hard work. SA, so when was the last time you saw DB? EB, oh, must be 53 years ago now. He died sadly. I remember it vividly. The 9th of September 1965. SA, how did you find out about his death? EB, it had been reported that the CWS has been found completely abandoned off the coast of Argentina. No bodies, no missing lifeboats, nothing. My brother being the captain and both of our parents being dead, I received the call of his death. It was a very sad day for me. He just never knew how to stop it. SA, stop what? EB, the thing that got rid of them all. They should have just stayed in their rooms. It would have been better for everyone. He wouldn't have felt so guilty, I'd imagine. It wasn't his fault, though. SA, stop what? What are you talking about? EB, I know about it. You know, he told me everything. It was on Christmas's 59 that he came back home to visit us. He was acting weird the whole time, twitching and mumbling to himself. He wouldn't talk to any of us properly all day, until he took me off to one side before he was leaving. He told me that he'd found something and it had followed him from the sea to the ship to the land. It just wouldn't leave him alone. I felt so sorry for him. He mentioned something about thinking that it was all just a fisherman's tale, so he had to find out. Then he kissed me on the cheek and left in a hurry. Later on, when I went upstairs, I seen that he had left me his journal on my bed. There was a lot of scribblings in there that hurt me to read. SA, did he tell you anything else? Was that definitely the last time you saw him? EB, that was the last time. I'll always remember it. The fear in his voice when he told me everything that had happened will stay with me until I die. Like I said, he had seemed anxious all night, as if he had been followed. He went upstairs to use the toilet at one point, and everyone downstairs could hear him shriek. He came down shaking and awkwardly laughing, telling us that he thought he saw something in the mirror. It must have scared him terribly because he was very loud. S.A. Do you still have the journal? Can we look at it? E.B. Take it. It's upstairs in a box under my bed. I've only ever read it twice. I don't like the memories. After that, we thanked E.B. and left with the journal. By the time we got out of the house, it was beginning to get dark, so we decided to stay at the B&B for the night and revisit the CWS the next morning. As we were strolling down the street, heading for the B&B, I could have sworn I heard that same scream I heard on the ship. It echoed in the distance, but it shook me to the bone. That night, I read through the journal while my granddad got his rest. It was interesting, chilling, disturbing, sad, confusing. As a child, I had never considered the possibility of the captain to be an innocent man, but I did now. I'll update you again as soon as possible with what I found out in the journal, as well as giving you the details of my latest experience on the CWS. I never thought that it could get any worse, but it did. The 20th of October, 2012. It's been over a week since the last time I shared my investigation with you all, and a lot has gone on in that short time. Not only do I have to tell you all about the journal and my last venture on board the CWS, but I also have some news regarding what has happened to me in the last 9 days. None of what I'm going to tell you is good news, and it's going to be the last chapter in this ongoing nightmare of mine. But so you all know right now, there is no happy ending. As I sat in the corner of the room soaked in moonlight, I began to read through the old journal I had been handed by E.B. Flicking through the first 20 pages or so, I could tell that the captain had once been a completely different man than the psychopath I had been told about in countless stories. He seemed like a friendly man, easy to get along with. I could tell that he was excited about his new job on the ship. He said he loved the feeling of being in charge and looking after his crew, and I could tell he meant it. He'd spend page after page describing the feeling he gets waking up in the morning and breathing in the ocean air, knowing that the rest of his life would be spent at sea. It wasn't until about halfway through the journal that I noticed something that jogged my memory. We docked in Brazil yesterday to drop off cargo at some local businesses. I noticed a bar not too far from the ship as we were loading it all onto the pier. We all knew we'd end up there for a few beers, so me and the boys decided to head on down as soon as we were done with offloading. I thought we were only going to have a few, but once you're in the mood, you're in the fucking mood. We'd gone a couple of months without booze and gambling, so we ended up there all night, and most of the morning too. Shh. It was about 2 a.m. and I was playing poker with the bartender's son and a couple of his fishing buddies. I'd just won with a full house when one of the guys said, "You think we should tell him the tale?" They all looked at me, eyes wide open and smiling, as one of them began the story. He said that there is a local myth, a fisherman's tale of a beast called the Kazatrap. It happened about 6 years ago and has been a sailor's worst nightmare ever since. A salmon hunter from the nearby village was out fishing one day, looking for his daily produce. He'd been out there from the morning until the late evening, and he'd felt that he'd finally found enough. It was pitch black out, so he decided to make his way home. But in doing so, he heard a loud scream from within the rocks up ahead. At first, he assumed that he was hearing things, but then it happened again. From the screaming and grinding of the rocks, he felt sure that someone had somehow gotten trapped on the rock formation. As he neared the rocks, a huge creature stood up right in front of him and shrieked. He turned his boat around as fast as he could, but it was too late. The creature had already jumped on the boat. That's when he ended the story. I asked him, "What is that it?" Apparently, friends and family of the man noticed a huge change in him. He was quieter and more wary of everything around him. He was on his boat a lot more, too. Not long after, though, the man killed himself. For it being the nightmare of every sailor, there wasn't much to the story. But I suppose it was a bit frightening. I thought maybe it was true. But of course it is just a fisherman's tale, so it's most likely bullshit. Although if I'm ever out at sea and I hear a scream like that, there's no way I'll be going to check it out. After finding that entry in the journal, I was curious to find out more. It wasn't until the last 3 pages of the journal that I found something that made me shiver. It actually happened. I don't know why it happened to us, but it did. We got caught in a storm last night, so we all had to pitch in. All of us were working hard on the quarterdeck, when one of the crew said that he heard something strange. We all laughed it off and joked about him for hearing things. But then it happened again. At first I thought it was the radio. The Beatles were playing and we were all singing along, so every other sound was drowned out. But not this. We all heard it this time. It was an almost human shriek. I immediately thought of the story of the Kaza trap, but it couldn't have been. It was a myth. I looked over the right side of the ship and could just make out a shadow on some rocks. It looked up at the ship on all fours, screamed, then dived under the water. Again, we heard the scream, but this time it was from the left side. We all made our way to the other side of the ship, and there it was. It stood up on its hind legs and followed us with its bright white eyes. It jumped from the fucking rocks right onto the ship. I don't know how, but it did. We looked it in the eyes as its mouth muttered words under its breath. I couldn't believe it actually spoke. It was some kind of language none of us could understand. It sounded like hundreds of voices merged together, some talking, some screaming. After that, I was stood there watching my entire crew being ripped apart. I just fucking stood there. I couldn't move. It was so effortless. I watched it punish them, biting, ripping, and throwing. After it was all done, it charged at me, pinned me down, screaming in my face. It shoved some of the flesh hanging from its jaw into my mouth. I vomited. I just couldn't take it. It looked into my eyes and growled mine. Afterwards, it charged right down to the bottom of the ship. I could hear the banging and feel the tremors all through the steel. I'm on my own in my room now with the door locked. I can still hear the voices of my crew. I just don't know what to do. After I'd finished reading the journal, I felt that I could make much more sense of the situation. Not everything was documented, but we had more information and could assume the answers to some of our lingering questions. I thought to myself that the captain had become a part of the ship because the Kaza trap wouldn't allow him to leave. He was almost like a pet. He would lock his crew away every night so that he could save them from being killed. He wasn't a bad person at all. I thought to myself about the song I had heard on the ship. Was he still alive? Was he bound to the CWS and being kept there by the Kaza trap? This is the reason I had to go back on the ship. I couldn't live with myself knowing that I'd let an innocent man suffer. The next morning, I told my granddad that we should just leave everything and go back home. He didn't seem to mind. He was old and tired. He'd gotten to go back to the CWS, and that was enough for him. I drove him back home and told him I'd come and see him tomorrow. Then as soon as his door closed, I took the same long journey back to the ship. With sheer determination and no fear, I clambered up the stairs, bought my ticket, and made my way onto the deck. Once again, it was completely bare. There must have been 5 people on board at most. I set off down the stairs and into the maze of corridors I had navigated before. But it was a lot quicker this time. As soon as I headed into the room and faced the door in the corner, that lack of fear I had 10 minutes ago had now been replaced with heavy breathing, trembling, and a sickly feeling in my stomach. I slowly made my way over to the door and placed my trembling hand on the lock. Then, just as I pulled on the handle, the huge metal door flung back and hit me in the face. I hit the floor and almost immediately fell unconscious. Not before I felt a hand grab me by the leg and drag me down the stairs into the darkness. Afterwards, I awoke in a dirty room, lying on an old bed. As soon as I opened my eyes, It was there, just staring at me from the other side of the room. It was on all fours and kept edging towards me, then taking a step back and screaming. I stared at it and felt as if I was staring death in the eye. I'd never been so scared in my life. Its jaw jutted outwards, and the same voice that sang the song I'd heard came out of its tattered mouth. The captain had not still been alive. It was the Khazar-trap all along. I questioned myself on what it would want with me, but the only thing I could think was that it wanted me dead. It slowly moved towards me, grabbed me by the head and showed me its sharp, yellow teeth. Then, in a voice too dark to be human, it whispered, "Mine." After that, it let me go. It just let me walk out of the room and back off the ship. I haven't been the same since, and it definitely wasn't worth it for the few answers that I've gotten. How much truth can you find out about a myth, a legend, folklore, whatever it is? I've been in my house for the past week, trying to get the courage to write this all down, because I knew I'd have to go over it all again. It may have let me leave the ship, but it will never leave me alone. I can still hear the voices of 100 dead men, and sometimes it will appear to me. Whether it's outside my window or waiting for me as I turn around, it's always standing there, staring me down. It has only attacked me a couple of times, so I know it doesn't want to kill me. This will be the last time you hear from me. This is my final update. I thank you all for your time. I can deal with what has to be done from here on out. I finally know what to do. I forgot to mention, however, that I took another look at the captain's journal yesterday. I found a page that was stuck to the back of the book. When I peeled it back from the cover, there was one more sentence scribbled down on the dirty yellow page. Ending it all is my only option. I'm so sorry, please forgive me. Thank you for joining us at the Cryptic Chronicles. As the shadows retreat and our tales come to a close, remember that the world is full of mysteries waiting to be told. If tonight's stories have stirred the cryptic depths of your soul, subscribe and turn on notifications for more chronicles of the macabre. Until next time, keep the spirit of horror alive, and may your nights be deliciously dark.
Whispers in the dark, a silent scream, a gathering of tales, or so it seems. Shadows dance with tales untold, in the heart of night, where fear takes hold. A compendium of dread, stories unfold, in the theater of the mind, horrors are told. A quintet of nightmares bound by fate, in the realm of the eerie that resonates. Each story a thread in the tapestry of fright, weaving through the loom of the endless night. A spectral symphony, a ghostly choir, singing of the macabre, igniting the fire. A compendium of dread, stories unfold, in the theater of the mind, horrors are told. A quintet of nightmares bound by fate, in the realm of the eerie that resonates. From the first to the last, the journey's stark. A descent into madness where nightmares embark. Each ending's a beginning, a new terror to chart. In this collection, where the darkest tales impart. So heed